Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host and producer. My name is James Fagoshnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, I'm convinced that in some way, shape, or form, the spirit of Justice Mosqueda, even though he hasn't passed, but the spirit of Justice Mosqueda is what is causing all of these problems before we record tonight.
I don't know what problems you're talking about.
I think the fact that I can't see, that it took me 3 attempts to do an intro has everything to do with the fact that our guest this week is Justice Mosqueda from the Acme Packing Company. He is...
That would make sense. What trouble were you having? Was there like a word you kept on stumbling over that you kept having to get around, or what was the issue?
You know, for whatever reason, the word involved has just always, it's always been out ahead of me, and I've been trying to, avoid problems with it, but it's
been, on the periphery?
Very, very much so. I'm including this in the, I'm going to find a way of putting this into the clip show for the end of the year stuff, so enjoy my maniacal laughter and trying to understand why words ended up inside of the Justice interview that are in there. So welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys are all doing well. We have the Green Bay game to preview. We have a pre-interview with pre-recorded interview rather, with Justice Mosqueda that we'll be playing here in just a moment. And we have a mailbag as well. But before we start, just want to thank you guys so much for listening to Norse Code. If you enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there for $3.50 a month. You get access to bonus material, bonus shows, the occasional Zoom watch-along, stuff like that. All of that is available over at patreon.com/NorseCode. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well and donate to the show, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and be one of the lucky souls out there that is walking around with a picture of Arif or myself on their, item of clothing, baby onesie, mug, that sort of thing. Check us out. We have our stuff out there that Drawplay Dave made over at norsecode.threadless.com. Is there anything you want to say about this interview that you did with Justice before we play it?
Yeah, I can't be held responsible for anything I say or anything Justice says in the interview. That's all I can say.
You know what? That's good enough for me. We're going to go to this interview that Arif conducted earlier today with Acme Packing Company's Justice Mosqueda. He was on the show a couple of weeks ago, as you may remember. Arif called him a Nazi in a number of different creative ways. I can't wait to hear how he does it this game. So we will see you at the other end of the interview for the mailbag.
All right, we're here with Packers owner Justice Mosqueda, the least valuable guest on the podcast, here to talk about how his unvaccinated quarterback is morally inferior to our unvaccinated quarterback. What's going on, Justice?
I'd like to not talk about that, frankly. I'm getting tired of my Tuesdays getting taken up by Aaron Rodgers talking to Pat McAfee about stuff that is very quickly debunked.
So McAfee is doing an amazing job, right? Because he's requiring us to watch this every Tuesday.
Yes.
That's high tier podcasting. That's incredible stuff.
That's why he got like $30 million from FanDuel or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah. I know people are like, "Hey, why doesn't he push back?" And he's like, "Well, that's not really what the show is about." And yeah, that's a little morally bankrupt or whatever. But aside from that, I mean, he's just doing an incredible job.
He also does mention a lot, he's like, "Yeah, I got the shots and stuff," and then he's just like, "Yeah, Aaron, do whatever you want." It is funny.
It's not the same as pushing back against the misinformation about India.
Yeah, that's always bad. The India stuff is the step too far for me and Rogers.
Yeah,
you can be an idiot about your body, but when you're lying about other foreign governments, that's when it's like, buddy, you can Google this.
Well, the issue is that he definitely found this out online. That's the...
Yeah. Yes.
All right, cool.
I'm tired of it. If we could talk about football, that'd be great. Also, this is getting cross-posted to APC, by the way. I don't know if you know that yet, but...
Yeah, sure, why not? So Packers with a win get a 93% chance to secure the first-round bye. The Vikings with a win get a 50-50 chance of making the playoffs. So very equal stakes at this game here. Vikings beat the pants off the Packers earlier this year. Feels like it won't be the same. There should be a number of players coming back. Also, I mean, the Vikings have split the series with the Packers a ton, so I don't think that really matters all that much. But they're playing in Lambeau, which I suddenly will not be able to go to. Tell me, Justice, is Lambeau overrated or underrated?
I still haven't been. I tried to get there like 3 times this year. And
that's right. Yeah, as an owner, you needed to get over to the owner-exclusive gift shop.
Absolutely. Yeah. I also learned there's an owner-exclusive gift shop online where you can get things like frames for your.
Oh, you don't even have to. You don't even have to go. Okay, wow. They're really stepping things up for you, the owner.
Look, the Packers are the team of the internet and the world. Many are saying, but yeah, Lambeau Field should impact the game. You said beat the pants off of the Packers. That game was down to the wire, and Kirk Cousins tried to throw Savage 4 interceptions. Settle down.
It wasn't close at all.
I did enjoy the Packers fans telling Vikings fans for like 2 whole weeks, like, congrats on winning your Super Bowl. It's like, settle down. It's a good bit though.
We've been making it a bit on the podcast. We've talked about how now there's a traveling Super Bowl trophy that appeared out of thin air as a result of it.
Who's a hold of it now?
The Rams. And the Vikings had a chance to win it back against the Rams, but of course they lost. So the Rams still hold on to it. The real question here is if the Vikings win, does another Super Bowl trophy emerge for them? Because obviously it doesn't for the Packers, right? If the Packers win, there's no Super Bowl. It's not their Super Bowl. That's the joke. So if the Vikings
I guess it's like a boxing thing, right? Where it's like multiple title belts, but like they're going to merge themselves in the NFC Championship game at the very least, right?
One would hope, right? that the title belts meet. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just like it feels like these games are always like too weird to really predict. Do you think like so from a bettor's perspective, obviously there's something to divisional games having a different relationship than non-conference and non-divisional games. Do you think that that's particularly true with Green Bay, Minnesota, or do you think that that's just normal divisional stuff?
I think because Zimmer throws so much on the table as a defensive play caller, I think there's probably a little bit more to that. You know, when you're seeing common opponents, and I mean, really, Aaron Rodgers is the only guy in the division who's kind of putting stress on Zimmer in this way. Like, I'm sure he's having to change things at a different level than most defensive coordinators do when they face quarterbacks in the division, especially in this singular matchup. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That makes sense. I imagine that Zimmer spends a lot of time in the offseason focused just on Rodgers. Well, let's talk about the individual players. First, Aaron Rodgers, how has he played since the Vikings game?
I don't know if you saw, but he just won December's NFC Offensive Player of the Month. So many people are saying that that's good, Arif.
You know exactly how much I've been paying attention to the news this week. So I did not actually see that. No, I've no.
Yeah, I might have broken the news to Arif before this that Dalvin Cook was playing in this game.
Justice is lying for this part right here. Okay, so NFC Offensive Player of the Month, deserved, undeserved.
Probably deserved. He's done very well. He basically is like, I'm not throwing interceptions anymore.
Has he? Well, that's that's not important as Vikings.
Interceptions don't matter. Yeah, turnovers are overrated. Many people are saying. No, I don't buy. No, I'm not buying into that. Interceptions, avoiding interceptions is important. I don't care.
Cousins entered last week having thrown like 2 interceptions all year. Did not matter.
Well, it's a factor. It's a fact. It's not the factor. I'm not saying Teddy Bridgewater is the greatest quarterback. Has Rodgers
practiced at all since coming back from COVID protocol?
A few times. Yeah, it's usually like the last day of the week. He hasn't practiced this week. He might practice tomorrow, which would be Friday, which is like kind of the walkthrough. Rodgers said after the game last week that his toe had been feeling better than any previous week before.
The COVID toe rashes is healing up?
There's no COVID toe. It is a fractured pinky toe. It did get banged twice in that Browns game.
Right, it was stepped on. Yeah.
One time by right guard Royce Newman, who has been an issue. And the best way to explain how much of an issue Royce has been is that he is your right guard and he stepped on your quarterback's left pinky toe. I want you to think about the math and the angles there.
This is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And then the other time was by a defensive player.
It was Myles Garrett banged it a little bit, and then they hit like commercial break, and they were like high-fiving each other. And I drew a green face mask on Myles Garrett. Free the man.
Well, so Myles Garrett coming to Green Bay, Rodgers leaving Green Bay.
No.
That feels like a downgrade. I mean, I love
Rodgers talked about again. I know you're not tuned into the NFL right now. You're busy with other things in life. But Aaron Rodgers yesterday was talking about retirement, and he basically said, "I'm not thinking about other teams. I don't know if I'm coming back or not, but I'm not thinking about other teams. Gutekunst is doing everything that I want."
So famously honest person Aaron Rodgers tells us that he's not thinking about other teams.
Look, that's fair. That's fair. I'm just saying the vibes are good for him coming back next season with the Green Bay Packers.
What does Jordan Love do? Does Jordan Love demand a trade?
Does Jordan Love have autonomy? I don't think so. I think we're beyond the point of if Jordan what Love happens walks to
into Gutekunst's office and he's like, "Hey man, you better trade me or I'm just not showing up to camp." Gutekunst is like, "Yeah, fine, whatever, dude."
Gutekunst is like, "I'll talk to your agent, who's also Aaron Rodgers' agent, and we'll see what he says about
it." Okay, why do quarterbacks do this?
So a lot of teams do this, actually. When I was working with the XFL, we did a big old study about who represents who as quarterbacks because we were trying to figure out who we could poach off of like practice squads and stuff like that. Right. Teams are they are stacking these quarterbacks more than ever before. And I think it's a thing that agencies are honestly driving. From what I have gathered, that is basically like insurance policies on the starting quarterback where, hey, maybe you want to move on from the starting quarterback, but I will still make that money.
Okay, yeah. It makes sense for the team. It makes sense for the agency. Does not make sense for the backup quarterback.
No. I mean, we saw how bad it went in New England with Garoppolo. Yeah.
I mean, man, the agent must be treating Jordan Love real well for him not to be shopping. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, it's wild to me. I still I get it, but I don't get it at the same time. It just seems like you're playing with fire a little bit.
Did the guy who was ahead of Love on the depth chart last year, Boyle, did he play this week?
He played last weekend, right? Because Goff was on the COVID reserve list.
Did you see that game? Were you able to look at a former Packer great, see how he did?
I watched it a little bit on Red Zone, because it was like pushing cover territory. But yeah, Tim Boyle Light Show or Tim Boyle Laser Show was not preseason levels, I guess we should say.
So he didn't cover, is what you're saying?
I can't remember, honestly. I forget. So Sunday was so long ago, Arif. I've been so busy, not tuned into the NFL like you.
All right, fair enough. Running backs. AJ Dillon's still better than Aaron Jones?
Yeah. That's still fair. I stand by that. Aaron Jones is still kind of banged up every week with the knee injury.
Has he played better than Jones over the past month?
As a runner, yeah.
As a running back, not as a runner, as a running back.
Yes, as a running back.
Okay.
Yes, Aaron. If you watch the AJ Dillon carries against Cleveland, like every single yard is through contact, every single one of them. He's a good running back. If they didn't have AJ Dillon, they would be a very, very, very different team.
So why did they re-sign Aaron Jones?
AJ Dillon didn't have his breakout until recently, and they also kind of do different things. Like Aaron Jones is the guy that you want on the edge. AJ Dillon is kind of like the power back.
Is the amount of things that they do differently worth a running back contract?
Oh, probably not, frankly. But he's here now, and it's not like he's in year one of a veteran deal. So like Aaron Jones isn't going anywhere for a couple of years. So you can't put milk back in the carton,
I get. I mean, that's a version of that saying. That's fine. No tight ends left on the run. Well, Josiah DeGuara, right? But the other two tight ends have the Aaron Rodgers disease.
No. Tanyan is on injured reserve. Right. Lewis and Davis are both on the COVID reserve. There's still a chance that they could return. DeGuara is healthy, but Daphne has a banged up ankle and actually got passed on the depth chart in terms of like the snaps this last week by Tyler Davis, who hadn't been really getting offensive snaps consistently up until last week. So there is a chance that Bronson Kafausi, do you remember him, the defensive end from BYU?
Yeah.
He is converted to tight end.
Really?
Yes, he is converted to tight end, and he is like a blocking tight end, and they've kept him on the practice squad. And Rodgers in the preseason, I don't know if you remember this moment where Rob Domofsky he asked Rodgers about Kafusi, and he was like, well, it's going to be nice to see him in Buffalo, after Rodgers said some nice things about him. And Rodgers said, Jesus, Bob. And that kind of like went viral, and they made T-shirts out of it and stuff like that. That was that moment. So Kafusi is one of Rodgers' guys, and he might end up getting called up for the first time this season as a tight end, just because they only have like 2, and like maybe it's 1.5, depending on how Daphne's ankle's holding up.
So he's this year's Kumaro?
He is. He's not related to a Bosa, though.
Okay, so what does the Packers' running game look like when they're this kind of hard up for tight ends? Does it change at all?
So Daphne is a very good run blocker. You can use him in line. They use him a ton at near the goal line and stuff like that. He's kind of weird because he's kind of like that Mercedes Lewis type of like run blocker, but he's in a smaller body. He's kind of like mini Mercedes Lewis. He's like Mercedes Lewis if you dropped an anvil on his head. DeGuara is more of like a move tight end that they use on like counter and slice and stuff like that. He's more of an off ball type of guy that they also use on like third downs, split out when they need a pass. So they definitely have a mix. I would be shocked if they didn't go into the game with the third tight end, the way that they rotate these guys and the way that Daphne's ankle situation is. So we're recording this on a Thursday. They could bring up guys up until game time, apparently, now with the new rules. So look for someone to move up. And if no one moves up, just assume Kafusi is going to get moved up on Saturday.
All right. Well, that's good to know. That, I think, brings us to that offensive line discussion. So you are super not happy with Royce Newman. I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that maybe one of the best examples of or one of the best approaches to attacking Aaron Rodgers and the protection is to run games on Newman, which for listeners, means like defensive line stunts and things like that, switching gaps and so on. Lost kind of in terms of in terms of his assignment, runs into people. You mentioned the toe thing. Are there other issues along the offensive line, given like kind of how banged up it is? Has Yaswan Nyman kind of lived up to what they need him to be? Has John Runyon been playing well at left guard? What's going on?
Yeah, all those guys are playing pretty solid, I think, other than Newman. And even Newman's issues are really just handling stunts. Like the fact that they have Nyman and Dennis Kelly in at tackle and they're able to survive with it, I think is a good sign. The fact that Braden is now on the reserve COVID list is a little bit worrying because they have to then drop down to Cole Van Lennon, who like the offensive line coach was talking about this week and was like, oh yeah, he's definitely not a left tackle. And it's like, if Nyman gets hurt, like he's going to have to play left tackle, or you're going to have to kick John Runyon, who's playing guard all season, out to left tackle. So they're very thin now, but the guys that they have in, they can rock with them. The big issue is just Newman once a game, twice a game. Like he's just going to like turn a guy loose on a stunt. They had it against Cleveland last week. Rodgers really only took like one big shot, I would say. And it was off of, Newman just turning a guy loose and him getting the clean clock on Rodgers. So you're going to get one, maybe two, but that's pretty much what you're going to get out of this pass protection unit.
What does Rodgers do to kind of, because obviously everyone knows like he holds on to the ball, he invites pressure in order to make a big play. It obviously works out for him a lot. What does Rodgers do from a protection standpoint that kind of mitigates this? And also, do the Packers have like some of the best offensive line coaching? And like, if we're down to Yaswan Nyman, who was not even originally on this team, playing well, like what's the deal? Because they lost Camp a few seasons ago. So what's going on?
Yeah, so Campen left. The guy now who replaced him is Steno. Steno is also the Packers' offensive room is actually very interesting. They're very collaborative. Seems like everyone gets to like have their section of the field. Like Rodgers was talking about how they break down everything this week, where like Stenovich is like handling the run game. The running backs coach and tight ends coach handle like goal line stuff. Their quarterbacks coach handles like third down. Their wide receiver coach handles like 2-minute drill. Stenovich is actually the guy who like brings in like a lot of the tricky dicky stuff, like the goal line stuff that you rarely see outside of like Kansas City and stuff like that. He brings in. So I think Stenovich is probably going to get a tap on the shoulder to become an offensive coordinator very soon. just between his
That's
background as a guy who
crazy.
he draws up plays, and he's a great offensive line coach. And there are very few things that are more valuable than those two traits. So yeah, I mean, LaFleur's built like a very collaborative room, I think, on the offensive side of the ball. A great coach. I think they're very good at evaluating talent. Like the fact that they were able to, Dennis Kelly started an entire season for the Tennessee Titans last year, and they just like signed the dude in like August or something, I think. It might have been July. But he was just like out there. They're like, we should probably grab this guy because we might need him at some point. And, they took a shot on him instead of, bringing in another undrafted free agent rookie to kind of like develop potentially on like the practice squad. So shouts to the team for doing that. What I would say about Rodgers is they've kind of changed what this offense has been, especially with MVS out. They haven't really been taking shot plays, and when they do take shot plays downfield, they're like design shot plays. So it's like going to be an incompletion. It's not going to be a sack. Like they'll take a 7-step drop from the gun, and it's just like borderline Hail Mary type of play. And that's kind of like what their deep game is. Like it's not a lot of like Rodgers taking a 3-step drop, patting the ball, patting the ball, patting the ball, patting the ball, hoping someone is open downfield. Like when they're going deep, they're going deep. And when he needs to get the ball out of his hand, he gets the ball out of his hands right now.
Given how few 7-step drops exist in NFL offenses these days, and given how kind of rarely defenses play that, do you think that has its own benefit, like maybe throwing off timing for defensive backs and things like that?
Absolutely. And pass rushers too, man. Like you got to think about how deep that quarterback is getting back there. There's not often that, you end up running 10 yards into the backfield and like that's the spot that you're actually trying to sack a guy. You know what I mean? So there's not very many quarterbacks who play like Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, I mean, everyone talks about him like as a gunslinger type of guy. If you don't have that guy in practice, I would assume it's very hard to replicate and get reps for.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. This is kind of interesting that because you think about like, hey, when they hired Matt LaFleur, I think a lot of people just like, well, they just hired a guy who had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay, which I don't know, may or may not be true, but obviously it seems to be running a good operation. This kind of stuff, when you think about like installing the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan offense, this isn't like part of that. This isn't something that we traditionally think is a big part of that. How big an influence is Nathaniel Hackett, who I don't think was a very sought after offensive mind after Buffalo? What kind of influence does he have on that kind of play design? And like, what element of McVay Shanahan principles does LaFleur even bring to the offense?
So the under center stuff, I would say, is a lot of LaFleur's influence between, McVay and his time with Shanahan in Washington and stuff like that. Nathaniel Hackett did not just coach at Buffalo. He was a Marrone guy who was there for Syracuse and Jacksonville too. Yeah. So he was in Jacksonville. He actually just got tapped on the shoulder.
Jesus Christ, that quarterback thing was so funny.
Yeah, sorry. He got tapped on the shoulder for the Jacksonville head coaching opening. Again, I don't know how much you're following the NFL these days, but he's interviewing for the head coaching job in Jacksonville. He talked about how he still has a couple of their hats in the presser today. I don't know how much. So Hackett, I think, is a lot more of like the spread passing stuff, I would say, is more of his influence. But the other guys who are interesting to me are like Getsy. So Getsy's the quarterback's coach. He's basically a disciple of Joe Moorhead. So I think a lot of the RPO stuff is coming from Hackett and Getsy, frankly.
Oh, all right. That's fair. Okay, so we talked a little bit about RPOs in our last episode of the podcast, and it feels like the mysticism of RPOs has been kind of stripped away, and then we finally get to kind of talk about kind of the bare bones of how an offense that features a lot of RPOs operates. I forget who asked on Twitter, is an RPO a run play or pass play? And then, I think a lot of people just responded it's a run play.
Most people chart it as runs. If you're from a charting perspective, you chart it as the run game because if you have to have the same constraints, you want it in your run packages for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, and you're coaching offensive linemen that particular way. You're not asking your nickel corner to do anything different, right? Like if it's a run play, you're asking him to do the same thing as if it's an RPO.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams are trying to keep that guy out of the fit to kind of like muddy the look for those teams. The big thing about Green Bay is their RPOs aren't really like downfield RPOs. Like Miami's RPOs, for example, are very different than Green Bay's, where Green Bay's like you're trying to run bubbles, right? Basically, like you're trying to run bubbles to Devontae Adams because he's so good with a ball in his hand, and your wide receivers are so big, and blocking on the perimeter is such an advantage for you guys compared to the defensive backs on the field. Whereas, Miami, it's a lot of like we're throwing a slant, and the slant is open, and Tua can only throw kind of like 10 yards away from him. So that's what we're running.
Have you seen like the crazy response the Tuanon gives whenever you bring up Miami and RPOs?
I can only imagine.
I don't know why they're so upset about this simple observation. Anyway, so the RPOs in the Packers offense. One thing that I kind of found interesting is that RPOs typically are as runs about as effective, if maybe a little bit less effective, as standard running plays, and against passes are about as effective or a little bit less effective than standard passing plays. But obviously, if you're replacing bad runs with bad passes, you're improving the offense. Is that element still there for Green Bay, or how are the RPO runs looking? How are the RPO passes looking when compared to standard dropbacks and standard runs?
They're pretty solid, and I think a lot of it has to do with like unique traits that the team has, and I think it's pretty clear that like they're running RPOs for Devontae Adams too. It's their way of kind of making you honor Devontae Adams in a lot of different ways. The fact that Aaron Rodgers has such a fast trigger in terms of just his release is definitely a benefit to them. Like when Jordan Love was in the game, they weren't doing a lot of the same things that they asked Aaron Rodgers to do. And I don't know if it sounds weird to say like Aaron Rodgers has a unique trait that helps him on RPOs because you think, there's so many other things that he could help you with in terms of like downfield accuracy or arm strength, stuff like that it kind of gets overlooked a little bit, but there certainly is something to say about this offense being like tailored for Aaron Rodgers specifically.
How does that come about? Like, how do you, as like an offense, you bring in Nathaniel Hackett, you've got Matt LaFleur, you remember the slant offense with McCarthy, you bring in Aaron Rodgers. Is Rodgers an enormous part of the collaborative process? Because it feels like every time that gets brought up, it gets not shot down, but kind of made fun of as a talking point that Rodgers is an important part of designing the offense. How does an offense come about that's designed for what Aaron Rodgers does well versus the stuff that's either a waste of his talents or stuff that he doesn't do well?
Well, I think that first year was a really good example of it. I mean, there were so many times where Aaron Rodgers year one, I think, 2019, even on those RPOs, he was dirting a couple of them where they were like,
yes,
maybe the split was too far outside. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. It seemed like really 2019 was like almost like an evaluation year of like, what do we want this to look like moving forward? And then from 2020 on, it's been like, all right, this is who we are. This is what we're good at. Like, let's just spam these plays, basically.
Is that more responsible for the Rodgers MVP season than drafting Jordan Love, or the other way around?
I think so. I mean, I think Rodgers, Rodgers is so hyper motivated and holds so many grudges that I don't know how much this Love thing really influences him, like in terms of like preparation and like on field results. Frankly, I think that's more of like a where do I want to be for the rest of my life. But it seems like he's able to turn that off. Where he's in the presser this week saying, "Oh yeah, I'm not even thinking about next year." It's like, you're not thinking about next year at all? I'm thinking about 2022 a whole lot right now.
All right, let's talk about this receiver group. So obviously you got Devontae Adams. MVS is back.
Just
right?
returned returned today.
And Randall Cobb might be back after
he's practicing.
Surgery?
Yeah, he is practicing. So that was very surprising. I don't think anyone expected that. Everyone who was there for the media open portion of practice was kind of surprised. Randall Cobb was out there running routes.
After surgery like a month ago.
Yes. Yeah. Week 13, I think, is when he got placed on injured reserve, and then he had core surgery. So
that's
fast
crazy.
Turnaround.
That's crazy. Yeah. All right, so you went from a receiving core that was just Devontae Adams to one that has Devontae Adams, potentially Randall Cobb, MVS, and Allen Lazard. And I think Amari Rodgers might still be on the COVID list, but he doesn't matter anymore anyway, so it doesn't. doesn't compute.
Yeah, the thing with Amari was they got so thin at return man on both sides that he was the punt returner and kick returner. So now it's just like a big old question mark in the return game. Malik Taylor was also a kick returner. He was their punt gunner. He's kind of like special teams ace type of guy, even when he doesn't have the ball in his hands. He got placed on the injured reserve last week. So now with Amari and Taylor out, things become a little bit more of a question mark. Jawan Taylor got moved up, but he's not really a special teams guy. He's like a positional wide receiver, and they kind of needed him for depth with when Cobb was out and MVS was out and Taylor was out, and they didn't use Rodgers at all last week, even when he was healthy, and they only had 5 receivers active for the game. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, they just signed Moore from the Seahawks, David Moore, to the roster. They worked out the CFL like return man of the year this week. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly question marks in the return game, and I don't really have answers. If gun to my head, I would expect like Patrick Taylor probably to be a kick returner, even though he hasn't done that recently. And then for punt returns, it's probably going to be Chandon Sullivan, their slot corner, who's probably just going to like fair catch stuff. That's what I'm expecting, but we haven't gotten clear answers there.
Fair enough. What does MVS like? How does the offense look different when MVS is there versus when it's not?
Vertical stretch, baby. I mean, it's like the whole Ted Ginn thing, right? Where it's like, hey, man, the guy might not be, this all-star wide receiver, but if you have a guy with that much speed, like it opens up so much more for guys underneath. Certainly makes a difference, in my opinion, in terms of the shot plays. Being able to get Alan Lazard clearly on like one-on-one coverage pre-snap and then being able to throw it to him over the middle, that has benefits. If Randall Cobb is back, their big thing was like getting Cobb into trips and then Cobb just eats things underneath. That's certainly a benefit with the tight ends that they have running off route or running off defensive backs. So those tight ends don't have to go deep would be a huge, boom for their passing offense. So MVS coming back is a huge deal and should not be understated, I think.
Is Alan Lazard an elite blocking receiver or a mid-tier blocking tight end?
So it's funny because he is an elite blocking receiver because he does play more wide receiver than anything else. But they also motion him down into the formation pretty much more than any wide receiver does in the league. So he's certainly a constraint. Like if you go out there in 11 and they have Alan Lazard and they're like, well, we can basically run 2 tight end sets with Alan Lazard out there, and your nickel corner is going to have to play Sam linebacker. So they certainly play a lot of games with him. He's probably as close to like a tight end wide receiver hybrid as you actually get in the NFL from like the actual wide receiver position.
Right, because it's usually from the other direction and you're really arguing with the arbitration committee of your franchise tag.
Right.
All right. Defensive side of the ball, again, have not been paying attention to the NFL this week. Who's healthy?
No outside linebackers. That's the big issue. Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, and Jonathan Garvin are really their only healthy outside linebackers. Darius Smith, obviously, IR'd. Whitney Merciless, IR. Chauncey Rivers, IR. Randy Ramsey, IR. Tipa Golea, who has moved up into the active roster off of the practice squad, is on the COVID reserve. And then Ladarius Hamilton, who has moved off of the 53-man roster to the practice squad, is on COVID reserve. So they are very thin. Aaron Adoye, I believe is how you say his name, was picked up onto the practice squad this week. He has a basketball background, and
I've never heard of this guy in my life. And
yes,
I do the draft. Like this is okay. So 2019 Baltimore free agent. That's what he was, an undrafted free agent out of Southeast Missouri State.
Yes, and I believe he played basketball at like 3 different colleges too. I'm incorrect. He has actually played basketball at Ball State, John A. Logan College, Western Kentucky, and Southeast Missouri State. So he played basketball at 4 different colleges.
Did he start at Ball State?
I do not know. I'm not a big college basketball guy.
You're the Packers expert. I need to know these things.
I know. I'm not grinding that though. I'm not grinding college basketball tape. I will say he played 1 year of football at Southeast Missouri State. He went into the Champions Indoor Football League and then played in your AAF, your Alliance of American Football. He was
I
part
don't
of the
remember him.
Birmingham
You know
Iron.
me, I'm the AAF junkie. I don't remember him at all. My AAF. I guess he wasn't good enough to play in the XFL.
He was already on the Baltimore Ravens at that point.
Oh, okay. Wow, look at him. Wow, too good for the XFL. That's it. That makes sense. He's on a roster now, so that follows.
Yeah, he's 28 years old. He's played in one NFL game. Don't see that background often. He was signed off of the street recently. You know, they had worked him out before. They had brought him onto the practice squad in October, but he only lasted for like 2 weeks. So hopefully he knows a little bit of the playbook because he might actually get game time this weekend.
What about the Stanford backer, Kalambai? Isn't he on the roster?
Yeah, so he's kind of interesting because he's kind of like a hybrid guy. He was obviously a pass rusher at Stanford. He basically played pass rusher his first year at Houston and then moved to inside linebacker. But truly, he's more of a special teams player than he has ever been a positional player. But his last, basically since his rookie year, he's been playing inside linebacker. So it's kind of hard to tell, especially if you're not at practice. It's not like we have preseason film or anything to evaluate him from if he's going to be an outside linebacker prospect or inside linebacker prospect for this team.
All right, and moving outside in, we've got the defensive tackle group. Kenny Clark obviously is playing well, not well enough for my IDP league, but he is a nose tackle. I should have expected that. Dean Lowry, I think, is playing well. Is Kingsley Keke on the COVID list, or is Arladge lying to me?
Yes, so he was placed on the COVID list. He also was a healthy scratch on Saturday against the Browns.
Scratch?
Yes, it was some like personal matter that the team isn't necessarily talking about, which is kind of what I assumed it was going to be. They just announced that, or I guess LaFleur just mentioned that today. He hadn't really been asked about Kingsley Keke's status up until today. But the way it worked out, I was like, this guy he's not a healthy scratch. There's just no way. Like that something must have happened, holidays, all that stuff, like maybe something in the family happened that really touched him. It seems like that was kind of the case, but yeah, Tyler Lancaster's behind him. He's been hurt this week. He hasn't practiced at all. And then it's like TJ Slayton, who is he's very raw in terms of a player. He has a ton of talent, but like conditioning is an issue. Consistency is an issue. And then Jack Heflin is the last guy on their 53-man roster right now. And he's played 17 snaps and he might be their D-line number 4 out of a 3 D-line front. So not great. Yeah. I mean, the line of scrimmage is really where they're banged up.
That starting group is playing really well right now, though.
Yes.
And so it's just the depth. So when they do rotations or when they get kind of that backup line group in there, the Vikings might go hurry up and try to keep those guys on the field and so forth.
I mean, you don't even have to keep them on the field. They keep them on the field for like 10 plays in a row. And it's very tough because they're trying to keep these guys' legs fresh, but they don't have depth behind them. So it ends up being this thing. I've talked about it on the APC pod before, and it's like a one hand washes the other type of situation where it's like, are the guys tired because they can't get off the field, or can they not get off the field because they're tired? And it's like, I don't think it matters. It's just the way that they play defense. They play so many stagnant coverages and they blitz so little from depth. Like they'll have 5 guys on the defensive lineman and send those, or on the offensive line, and they'll send those 5. But it's not like they're sending Devondre Campbell or Chris Barnes or Oren Burks on blitzes very often. And when you're getting pretty predictable in terms of your games and stunts, like you can get 4-yard carries, over and over and over again, like the Cleveland Browns showed, and then you're on the field for 15 plays, and then your backups are in, midway through the next drive because your guys are tired. It's like, that's a problem. And when you don't have depth, like maybe you should start sending more blitzes.
So that inside linebacker group, that one also, like Oren Burks is on the COVID-19 list.
Yep.
And he was a guy that last time we had talked, I was like, I don't know that he knows how to play football. And you kind of pushed back that he kind of figured a lot of things out. I don't know if he figured out enough things to kind of be part of the regular starting rotation or anything like that. But, Chris Barnes, Devondre Campbell, they're playing better than I think we typically expect over the last decade of inside linebacker play from the Packers than we usually get, right?
Yeah, the big thing is Barnes is just kind of a guy. Burks has been worked out of the lineup. That's an improvement
again over the last decade.
I agree. I agree. Look, I'm not arguing that. It's just you could still kind of go at Barnes. Burks, yeah, him being on the reserve or the COVID reserve list is a big deal. I was hoping that he would get more involved. He hasn't been. I think they're trying to keep him healthy for like special teams just because he plays so many reps. And Ty Summers, who, him and Burks were number 1 and number 2 in special teams reps going into this last week. And then Summers obviously got put on the injured reserve. So I think it's a thing where they're like, you're going to be running so much on special teams. We don't really want to run like packages for you on defense, but you got to do something. And now their backup is Isaiah McDuffie. He's the 3rd inside linebacker on the team right now as it stands today. If Burks doesn't test back in and is cleared to play for Sunday Night Football, McDuffie hasn't played a single snap of defense this season. So red flags on this defensive front across the board.
Boy. All right, well, let's talk about the secondary. It seems like there's better news for the Packers side of things. Kevin King comes back from COVID-19 reserve, which it doesn't sound like amazing news, but he's the dime guy because Rasul Douglas has asserted himself as an important player for the Packers' big turnover machine. Plus, Douglas is playing more than Stokes now, right?
I mean, they're both full time now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're both full time. They split up reps, left and right cornerback. So that's kind of how that ends up working. Kevin King had basically been completely phased out of the defensive packages up until the Baltimore game. And then the Baltimore game, because Mark Andrews is such a big body, they really started using Kevin King as their dime back, and they usually used Henry Black as their dime back. So when they go into 6 defensive back looks, the Packers ended up using 3 safeties, and Henry Black was that 3rd safety. They made that switch against Baltimore. Kevin King ended up going out there, so they ended up using 4 corners with Chandon Sullivan as the other slot guy. And then Kevin King, obviously, right before the game against Cleveland, was put into COVID protocol, so he didn't end up playing. So it'll be an interesting test to see, like, is that their kind of plan moving forward to use Kevin King as that dime guy, especially if Henry Black, who is on the COVID reserve now, isn't able to play.
So are we going to reasonably expect a significant amount of time? I mean, the Vikings, obviously, they already play pretty heavy. They don't do a lot of 11 personnel. They're doing it a little bit more this year, but for them, that's still among the lowest in the league. And Adam Thielen, who I think a lot of people expected to play this week, including me, ended up actually doing the opposite, going to injured reserve. So it's Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, and then maybe D.D. Westbrook and the track guy from Penn State, Dan Chisna, or Chisena, I guess we've been told is how it's pronounced.
The big thing with the Packers, if you're going to be in 3rd and 6 plus, they'll play you in dime. That's kind of how they've been operating.
So and that's why you brought up the Mark Andrews example, because they'll play dime against packages that expect tight ends to be there in the passing game, and they think that they'll win those matchups.
Yeah, and it's a lot of one-on-one coverage, frankly. I mean, that's and it's been an issue.
You said they don't blitz from deep, and then there's a lot of one-on-one coverage. Is that the safeties playing
they'll play cover
high?
2. They'll play 2-man. Okay. They'll play 2-man. Like, they'll just lock it up and just play 2-man and then run some sort of 4-man game up front. Yeah, that's what they do.
Does that work?
It works sometimes, man. It works sometimes. It works when teams throw to not Henry Black. Usually is how that ends up working.
Well, not an issue this week. When teams throw to now Kevin King instead of
in the slot without sideline help.
Without sideline help.
Yep, because they'll use him inside.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like a lot of fun. When you take a look at this matchup, when you see Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne, and you take a look at the dime defense that the Packers have, which I think individually has a lot of talent, Adrian Amos, Darnell Savage. How do you feel about 3rd and 6 when you see that?
I worry about Justin Jefferson. Outside of that, 3rd and 6 doesn't really worry me. What worries me is them just being able to hand off to Dalvin Cook and just wearing out the defense, and then backup pass rushers are out there, and you're like, oh man, it's 1st and 10, in shot range for Kirk Cousins to throw a bomb to Justin Jefferson, and Tipa Galea and, Jonathan Garvin are out there at outside linebacker. That's what really worries me about this game.
This is a good question, because one of the reasons the Packers were so effective at shutting down Kirk Cousins last year on the boots is that you ended up having a lot of agility from whoever was the end man of the line of scrimmage on the weak side to attack the quarterback. They could turn around and spin and attack the quarterback. Without Zadarius Smith, without Preston Smith, I guess there is Rashawn Gary, but he's injured this week.
No, he's able to play.
He's back. Okay.
Yep.
So you've got Rashawn Gary. Is the athleticism there to be able to play both the run and the pass on a boot play action that the Vikings have been using a lot less, used a little bit more against the Rams, but might have available to them this week?
Yeah, I think so, because Gary's usually the guy over the right tackle. His big thing is he is great as long as he doesn't have to keep contained for like a mobile quarterback in the pocket. I don't expect Kirk Cousins to break the pocket very often outside of like boots, and often on boots, they just have him just like rush the quarterback, frankly. Mm-hmm. So I would expect like those, I don't know what you want to call them, those slide play action stuff where it's like the tight end goes across the formation, and if the pass rusher's in the quarterback's face, he just dumps it off to him.
Conklin. Yeah.
Yeah, I expect a lot of those to be completed this week, and hopefully the Packers can rally up and tackle the tight end across the formation that way.
All right. Before we talk about your favorite topic, Packers special teams, we do have a question from a listener, Christopher Wiley. What is the dumbest thing Aaron Rodgers will say in the offseason?
So NASA just hired like 20 theologists, right?
Oh God. Oh, this is good. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Yep.
So
for people who aren't paying attention, for the explicit purpose of trying to figure out how humanity might react to first contact, right?
Yes. Yeah. They basically, NASA gave a bunch of money to theologists like in 2005 or something like that. And now they're asking them and they're like, hey, we need some info about what happens if we tell people the aliens are here.
The thing we paid you for. Have you worked on it? Turn in your paper.
Update ETA. So yeah, I mean, look, if the aliens arrive, Aaron Rodgers might say something that will like ruin humanity. I would say
that rules. So okay, because the question that was asked also includes an example: the government is spreading COVID using contrails. Aaron Rodgers is explicitly a chemtrails guy.
That is what Seneca Wallace said, I believe.
Okay, so Rodgers hasn't said anything publicly about chemtrails.
No, but he has talked about how he's seen UFOs before.
Can you get Nagler to ask Rodgers about chemtrails?
I don't know if Nagler is going to do that for me, frankly. I could ask. I can't promise a result though.
Okay. So Rodgers says he's seen a UFO, and we've got this business about NASA hiring theologians.
Yes.
Do you think Rodgers thinks that NASA checking in on the assignments they gave to the theologians is evidence, kind of like you've probably actually never read Ender's Game, have you?
I actually did in high school.
Oh, okay. Word.
They were all alive in a real thing. It wasn't a simulation. That's Ender's Game.
Yeah, spoilers for Ender's Game. Not that sentence actually gives you a lot to go on, but I'm going to spoil it more. So at the end of the book, they kind of speed up the process, and that gives a clue to some of the kids that this isn't necessarily a simulation, that this is real. Do you think NASA's doing the same thing, kind of pushing or do you think Rodgers thinks NASA's doing the same thing, pushing the theologians to come up with an answer because we're going to need that answer sooner rather than later?
I don't know, because on one hand, you could look at it like that, and then on the other hand, I could see Rodgers' brain being like, see, the government's lying to you again. Big alien is in the pockets of the politicians.
Big alien. You got to watch out for the alien industrial complex. All right. So you think that the dumbest thing Aaron Rodgers will say this offseason might concern aliens?
Yes.
Does Rodgers believe in anthropogenic climate change?
I don't know what that first word means.
Man-made global warming. That humans are causing global warming.
I think so, but I don't think it's come up.
And again, you got to push Nagler to ask these questions.
They're about to go on a Super Bowl run. They could clinch the NFC this weekend if they beat Minnesota and the Cowboys lose.
Right. And if the Super Bowl doesn't happen because of climate change, that sounds pretty important.
These are McAfee questions. You're going to the wrong source here.
That's true. Yeah, we should get McAfee to ask. You're right.
Yeah, you gotta get him when his hair is down, not when he's on Zoom meetings in Green Bay.
Does Rodgers use a hyperbaric chamber?
No, I think he's too granola for that.
Yeah, but he's like recently he's given off a lot of crypto bro. No, but you're right. It's a wellness thing. That's like a big part of what
he is gonna.
What's her name?
For what Tom Brady does for like health stuff, Rodgers is gonna be the wellness guy post career. Like that is the grift.
So he he 100% does yoga. Does he? Okay? So have you seen that post of God? I don't. This might ruin the iTunes explicit rating of the person sunning their perineum.
His alleged girlfriend?
No, not his. Well, she might. I don't know, but just in general, it went viral a couple of years ago of someone buck naked showcasing, spread eagle showcasing an area where the sun typically doesn't shine to the sun in order to improve their energies.
His alleged girlfriend does that.
Oh, really? Shailene does that. Yes. Okay, so then
I had to look up perineum real quick to.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to get around the iTunes explicit thing. What? So good chance that he does. Like, what's more important than energy?
Look, man, win in Rome.
Right. Does that give him some immunity, do you think?
To what? I mean, he got COVID.
Like generally.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's just like microdosing sun cancer, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is. But like it's like good though.
Okay.
Sure. All right, special teams. Why are the Packers special teams so awful? And are they going to get worse because of all the things you just described about the returner, the lack of some of their special teams aces being available, and etc.?
I think there's a chance they get worse. We haven't even touched the big one. Corey Bojorquez is on the he's on the COVID reserve list, and they don't have an extra punter. There? So they said that they have a contingency plan, and then LaFleur said, punter? "I won't talk about it." Yeah, I guess.
Has Mason Crosby punted?
So he punted one time in this past preseason. It was his first punt at the NFL level. He punted one time his senior year at Colorado in 2006. J.J. Molson, their backup kicker on their practice squad, has not punted. They also used Bojorquez as the holder. And
right, today, so that was my next question, is holding.
Yes. Today, Maurice Drayton said that they're still having like open tryouts at holder right now.
Open tryouts at holder? It is
Thursday. Yes. It could be bad. It could be very bad on special teams this weekend. I will not lie to you.
Well, okay, but alternatively, this increases the probability that they'll like desperation fakes, right?
Yeah, or just like straight up like going for it, I would think.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's bad. I mean, they're out all their returners. They started the year with Kylan Hill as their return man on kick returns. He's out.
But he's on
then
IR.
They used Malik Taylor. He's out. He's on IR. Then they used Amari Rogers. He's out because he's on reserve.
And IR. Yeah.
Yeah. He was actually better as a kick returner than as a punt returner. But yeah. And then he's also the punt returner. So now you have to find out a new punt returner who's probably going to be Chandon Sullivan, who's probably just going to go back there and fair catch punts, which is totally fine at this point in the season.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you have big question marks at several like key special teamers who like don't even play with the ball in their hands, and then both return spots and punter and holder. So, and we still have 2 days of testing to go. So not great.
What was the, okay. Yeah. I think actually you were the one I talked to about how important holding was. And you were like, I've got no idea what you're talking about. But, when Bojorquez was released from the Bills, one of the issues that despite him being a good punter was that he was not a very good holder. And I saw a podcast, I think, with the Cover One guys who were pretty great when covering Buffalo sports. You should check them out. That they had an interview, I think it was Jay Feely, about how important holding is, stuff like angles. It's not just like getting the laces lined up. It's getting the timing right. It's getting the angle of the ball right. It's making sure that you understand kind of the alignment that the kicker is going for in every situation. There's like a ton of stuff that goes into holding. And so they don't have a holder. They say they've got because it's open tryouts. They say they've got a backup plan at punter and will and refuse to divulge what that plan is, but the options that are available to us on the roster don't give us a ton of. Well, how did Mason Crosby do on those 2 punts you mentioned?
I can't speak to the one in 2006. The one
again. I thought you were going to dig deep. What is this?
I don't.
Why would
I don't even know if the coach's film is available. I don't know if it still exists. Special teams from Colorado in 2006. There's like one guy who has that on his hard drive, but the other one was fine. The other option that it was because J.K. Scott had a
That's
cramp.
Right.
He had a cramp, so they were just like, Mason, go do it. So it's not like something that they planned for him to do regularly. It was just J.K. Scott got cramped up and someone had to punt in a preseason game, so Mason went out there.
Has Aaron Rodgers ever pooch punted? Maybe they'll go for it on 4th down, and actually they won't. He'll pooch punt.
Please do not use the MVP quarterback who has a fractured pinky toe.
Wait, but it's his right foot that would be.
That's fine. Plant foot, I don't want anyone rushing his legs. Please do not do that, because he's not going to be 8+ yards back where he gets those punt protections. By rule, you can run into him if he's just doing it from the shotgun. So please, for the love of God, LaFleur, do not let him pooch punt. Do not let Arif put this negative energy into the universe.
Aaron Rodgers pooch punt. Let's go.
No.
Do you think he'll do it on 3rd down?
Please stop. He's the MVP of the league. Go for it. Don't punt. Don't punt.
3rd and 14, man. I don't know. It's tough to convert.
Let Randall Cobb punt. He seems like he's a great athlete. He seems like he could do anything. Let anyone other than Rodgers punt.
Actually, honestly, if I was going to pick somebody on the roster who might be able to punt, Randall Cobb is maybe in my top 5 on that list.
Randall is top tier of I bet he could do that.
He could do anything.
I bet corner. I bet he could play shortstop. I bet he could do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's probably a couple of sports that he can play, much less a bunch of positions within football. That follows. He seems like he would play shortstop.
Is it because he's short, or you just do word association there? And I guess he played quarterback.
I'm the last person to make short jokes.
That's fair. That's fair.
It just seems like he'd be a pretty reasonable defensive player in baseball. He produces enough offensive output, but I bet the Yankees would draft him.
Hopefully not this year. We need him to come up big for some 3rd downs in the playoffs.
Well, that's a concern with Russell Wilson, right? The Yankees still hold his rights.
Russell Wilson, you're not following the NFL, but Russell Wilson today was like, I hope this isn't my last game in the NFL.
Actually, I did see that. I also saw someone share a November 17th video of Jay Glazer saying that the quarterbacks that are going to be available include, of course, Aaron Rodgers, obviously, Russell Wilson. I mentioned one other name as a guy who's available. But the draft is not that great. I guess the draft is so bad that people are asking Hendon Hooker to declare after today.
I can't remember who that is. The Virginia Tech guy?
Former Virginia Tech guy. He transferred somewhere.
Oh, no. I remember him. He should get his education.
Yeah, I watched him when I was watching.
He's at Tennessee.
He's at Tennessee. Bowl MVP, maybe, of the Tennessee game? I don't know, man.
he should get his education, is my thought.
So you haven't seen any of him this year, then?
No, because they had that guy from Auburn, right? They Cam Newton-y type of guy who was getting snaps for a while, or the guy from Michigan.
Thing? Auburn?
No. It was the Michigan guy who's built like Cam, so I ended up making him from Auburn. But it is the Michigan guy. So Hooker wasn't even full-time starter this year. That's buddy. I don't get it.
All right.
He still has a couple days to he has 2 weeks to be able to say JK, I'm going back to college.
He said he's returning, but a lot of people were like, man, these quarterbacks are bad, and I just saw a good game from a quarterback.
I did see some wide receiver who put up 400 yards, put up one of those I'm coming back graphics, and I was like, I don't know, guys. Feel like we jumped the shark here.
The Gophers wide receivers are all coming back, and it's I don't know.
So is that running back who got hurt, right?
Well, yeah, but that's fair. But all the Gophers running backs get hurt, and then they're too injured to play in the NFL anyway, so they might as well finish out their college career.
Get your education.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. It's the wide receivers that bother me. It's man, you should stop going back to the Gophers. Are you for this?
And they run that RPO offense, right? Man. They run that RPO offense.
It's so ugly.
No one else can run slants like these guys, man.
That's true. These are very good receivers in a very aesthetically ugly offense.
All Fleck, right. Yeah, I mean, you're talking to Packers fans too right now, so they have many thoughts about how ugly this RPO offense is that has seemingly like evolved into not only just this RPO offense, but also like a six offensive line offense that involves the Wildcat. Sure. So it's just 100%. Like the two extremes of like we're gross and not really trying to compete in this way. Like we're just spamming meta plays.
Yeah, Gophers played spoiler for a lot of teams this year. I don't know. Very weird team. I don't expect them to be good next year, but I guess they were good-ish this year. Who cares? Okay, so if the Packers lose, it's because of special teams.
Special teams or their depth at the line of scrimmage, I would say. Those are the two big things. The offense, I think, is pretty good. I mean, outside of like an active god on the offensive line.
The only person you care about is Royce Newman being bad.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, frankly. So if you can get away with a couple of drives, when the Packers have the ball on offense and you can just wear down this defensive front and special teams does something wacky like they did against Chicago, yeah, you're in a good spot. Outside of that, I think Green Bay is in a good position to win this
Okay, that Chicago game was like a uniquely awful special teams performance.
They legit, like, if you look at like the DVOA, they're like, yeah, the Packers won by like 12, and they should have won by 30 if not for the special teams. Like if they had average special teams. And you look at the game and you're like, that's accurate. Like they did give up 3 scores on special teams that they should have had. Yeah.
So that was such a uniquely bad performance that even without a punter or a holder or a returner, I can't imagine we'll see a repeat of that.
I'm knocking on wood right now.
Do you have wood? That sounded like plastic.
It's my wood desk. How dare you?
Yeah, well, you should check into the authenticity of that desk. Do you have a score prediction?
Let's do 30-24. Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, all right. I can't complain about that.
Tell me how you're feeling about this Vikings team. Outside of, we touched Thielen is on IR, Dalvin Cook is coming back. Is there anything else?
Well, are we going to do the second half of the pod?
This is the second half of the pod.
Okay.
We're here. We have arrived.
Okay. Yeah, second half. I don't know, man. This Vikings team is like... So I just wrote this like 5,000 word piece on Kirk Cousins and how we got to where he is and why that means he's not going to be able to go to where he wants to go. Because he's a nerd, right? And the thing about him is that he over-prepares. He's super diligent. He spends all his time memorizing as much as he can about offenses, defenses, tendencies, and stuff like that. And he probably would never have been able to become a starter at Michigan State and set a bunch of Michigan State passing records if he wasn't such a dork about it, right? But that same tendency is the very reason that he can't be an elite quarterback, because he cannot play by feel. And in order to kind of win in situational football, you need to be able to play by feel. I mean, you watch Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, right? You know that's kind of what uncaps quarterback potential, is the ability to kind of feel out what the geometry of the football field is telling you, right?
Yeah, and the big thing with Kirk is like sometimes, frankly, his brain is telling him the wrong thing, and then he just makes an incredibly dumb pass. Like you'll see him throw into double coverage on a slant flat, and you're like, what? You're like, a high school kid would know not to do that. And it looks weird because like 80% of the time it looks like he's operating at the line like Tom Brady, and then 20% of the time it's just spinning out of control.
Yeah, so I looked at his play in standard down, so first and second down, before the final 10 minutes of the game. So first 50 minutes, first and second down over the past 7 years. He's like the 6th best quarterback in that situation, like in terms of EPA, right? And obviously he's had a really good supporting cast over the years with the Vikings and with Washington. But like in terms of statistical production, he's like the 6th best quarterback. And then you take a look at third and long, or you take a look at the final 10 minutes of the game when trailing, or the final 10 minutes of the game when leading, and he is like 25th out of 40, right? It's not out of 32, but like 25th, like below average. And that to me tells me kind of basically everything about Cousins, because it's everything that you feel about Cousins, right? It's everything that you think about him, because you at the end of the season, you take a look at his year-end statistics, you see that he's playing really well, and that these statistics typically track with success. The top quarterbacks typically are leaders in adjusted net yards per attempt and EPA and stuff like that. Like Aaron Rodgers is usually top 3, Tom Brady is usually top 3, and then whatever quarterback we're enamored with is top 3, whether that's Russell Wilson or Kyler Murray or Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes or whoever, right? And so he's in that conversation very often. And that's because of the 80% of the time that you mentioned. And it's this other 20% of the time that I think appears a little bit more often in divisional games. So it's kind of surprising how well the Vikings have done, relatively speaking, against the Packers. That always makes me worry going into games that there's not going to be a solution to a problem that the other team is going to present. So now that you don't have, and I think this is why Kirk Cousins is very reliant on a supporting cast, because if your approach to quarterbacking is textbook, if you throw the read based off of what the play tells you, what the defense gives you, and what route beats what coverage, and don't pay attention to matchups, you need your guys to always be winning, and not because you're not the kind of quarterback that finds a backup corner, go into the game and pick on him, right? Like Aaron Rodgers is brutal about it, right? If when Chris Boyd comes in, that dude is seeing 10 targets until he's run off the field, right? But for Cousins, he still takes a look to see if it's too high or single high. Then he takes a look to see the cornerback leverage. Then he takes a look at kind of all the other tells he needs to try and figure out if it's man or zone or kind of what coverage that they're seeing, whether or not there's a shell that prevents deep passes. And then he throws that. And so you need Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson to play well if you're not going to care about what matchup you're facing, right? And so that's why he's his supporting cast guy, is because he doesn't care about matchups, because that's not how he's wired. And so without Adam Thielen in this game, you've got KJ Osborne, who I think is a really good receiver, right? Like I think he's a wide receiver too somewhere. When you don't have all the pieces functioning, I don't see what the offensive solution is for Cousins.
Never forget, this is the guy who kneeled instead of spiked at the goal line with clock expiring, at the end of the first half. Right.
Well, because he's memorized the textbook answers.
He's not a natural. Yeah. It's right. It's a robot. It's like a script. It's code. Kirk Cousins is code.
And if the code isn't there, like if it's the end of the game and you're in the 2-minute drill and the defense gives you the middle of the field, because of course they do, because there's 40 seconds left and you don't have timeouts, he just takes it because that's what's open, right? And it's the same thing as kneeling instead of spiking, right? It's the same thing as throwing away on fourth down. It's just, this is kind of what the script of this offense versus this defense tells me. And I have completely eliminated an understanding the situation. Like, he's bad on 3rd and long, right? Because that requires that you get to a certain point on the field. Anything below that is a failure, right? And there's some quarterbacks that are like really surprisingly good on 3rd and, like Teddy Bridgewater, for example, is not a very good quarterback. But on 3rd and long, he becomes like really good. Like, he is the opposite of Cousins in that, he's a smart quarterback and all that, but like, he's just not good for the 80% of a football game. But as soon as a situational kind of awareness requirement appears, he does like a weirdly good job, right? And so he's kind of the opposite of Cousins. Neither are helping you win games, right, at this point. But
yeah,
it's certainly. It's like nuts going from Teddy to Kirk to see, and obviously with Case Keenum in the middle, right? To see what happens when somebody who only plays based off of kind of the situational awareness of knowing what you need in 3rd down versus a guy who only plays based off of kind of what's open to him and not taking these chances, which is why Cousins was entering that Rams game with only 2 picks, right? Because he doesn't throw dangerous passes, which is kind of the opposite of the discussion about Aaron Rodgers not throwing picks, because he does take the risks. They just work out for him because he's good.
Yeah, and he has wide receivers who can win at the catch point, right? I mean, Devontae Adams is coming down with that ball at the very least. That ball isn't cleanly going into the defensive back's hands. Defensively for the Vikings, where are you guys at? So I saw Harrison Smith didn't practice on Wednesday. He's practicing now. What does this defense look like right now?
So the issue, of course, is I think the front more than anything else. Like, I expect Harrison Smith to play. I expect Xavier Woods to play. Cameron Dancer and Patrick Peterson, like, that's not the most stellar kind of coverage unit, but the issue really is up front, right? Because without Daniel Hunter, without Everson Griffin, You don't really have any bona fide pass rushers because the whole idea was to get pressure off the edge and stop the run up the middle with the two nose tackles they have with Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce, who are both actually playing really well. Like Michael Pierce played out of his mind against the Rams. Dalvin Tomlinson had a really good game. They're both playing really well, but for them that means a different thing than if like Linval Joseph is playing well because he's a pass rushing nose tackle, right? Or right. If like an actual three technique is playing. If Sheldon Richardson's playing really well, you're getting pressure. But they're playing defensive tackle. Sheldon Richardson has been moved to defensive end because they're so thin at defensive end that they moved Sheldon Richardson out. So now you've got a 300-pound defensive end playing on the edge, not playing 4, right? Like it's not like a Michael Bennett's the wrong one. Who am I thinking of? In that Seattle group, it was like Red
Averill?
Bryant or something. No. I was thinking like the guy who played the 2 gap.
Yeah. Red Bryant.
Yeah, Red Bryant. Like way back, like 2013, right? It's not like that. They're playing him on the edge, like an edge rusher, because they're run out of those guys. They've got like DJ Wanham, who's just not good. Like he's got like sack numbers and pressure numbers, but they're all kind of fake. Like unblocked sacks, or the defense, like the left tackle just kind of like fell over, and like, well, I'm glad he got the sack in that situation, but I don't know how well that projects going forward. So there's not really much of a pass rush. And like, their backups are like Armon Watts and James Lynch are like really good backups, but like, again, they're not pass rushers. So that's the concern, right? Is that like, Patrick Peterson is playing really well this year. But if he's not going to get help up front without any pressure, he's not going to be able to hold on against Devontae Adams or MVS or whoever. There's no answer for speed on in the defensive back group anyway. Especially now that they've lost Bashad Breeland, who is not a fast corner, but might have been their fastest corner, depending on how much food Cameron Dancer ate that week.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Do you have a score prediction for this game?
Yeah, Zimmer is weirdly good against Rodgers, so I still think the Packers win, but it's probably something like 27-17. I think it's a lower score. I don't think it's that close. The special team stuff, I don't know, because the Vikings are actually playing really well in special teams and the Packers aren't, and that like changes things, but that's like so random. It's so difficult for me to like incorporate.
That's fair. All right. That's pretty much the only questions that I had. I feel like our first run through with the Vikings, and then, obviously consuming the Vikings for going on to 17 weeks now is pretty good.
Yeah, that's fair. All right.
We're done. See ya.
All right, well, thanks so much for coming on, Justice. I hope you don't screw anything up for us when we get out of recording this. If we do, of course, I'll blame you. Where can people find you?
Acme Packing Company. Read everything, consume everything that we have. We have a podcast network. We have a website. Click every link that you see that we send out from Acme Packing Company. You can find me on Twitter at JUMOSQ. Outside of that, that's pretty much it.
Cool. Sweet. Thanks so much, man.
All right, the first question is from Jeff, who asks, how do I handle the Vikings beating the Packers, giving us hope, then ultimately losing to the Bears at home?
I don't know that there's an enormous risk of that, but if there is, how do you normally handle it? Because it feels like this is always happening. So, like, I don't know, just don't let your guard down. If the Vikings beat the Packers, in like resounding fashion, it's the Bears in the next week. Like all bets are off. You know this, I know this, we all know this. The Bears could play actual backups, it wouldn't matter. The Vikings, when they played actual backups, nearly beat the Bears, and it felt weird that it was disappointing that they lost that game, even though they weren't trying to win that game. Like they just that's how they get you. You just have to keep that in mind. You have to what do boxers do? Keep their chin down, right? You got to do that. I know lots about sports.
My favorite thing about following you on Twitter is when you venture into another sport that you're not very familiar with. Like when the baseball playoffs are on, or when everybody's watching the Twins and therefore you feel like you also should be watching it. And you're like, I don't know why that guy drops his bat. Why would you do that? Like, why wouldn't you just carry the bat around this
I don't think I've ever said that once.
Well, you also said that the other day you were upset that I had tweeted that you had claimed to be some sort of a, not intellectual, like you were an academic.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever claimed that I am an academic. Jesus Christ, no.
So
I would never stoop so low.
Yeah, well, you'd never claimed to be a part of anything involving JMU either, but yet here we are. I'd certainly never do that either, for the record. Let's go to Vikings Wales, who asks, when was the last time a team won a Super Bowl with a QB that averaged 15.5% of the cap like Kirk has these past 5 years? Is it time for him to take a big pay cut if he wants to win a Super Bowl?
This question's kind of interesting because first it uses like the average of Cousins' cap, which I don't know is a measure that's used all that often. Like if the Chiefs happen to win a Super Bowl anytime in the next 5 years, it feels like the premise or the underlying argument underneath the question would probably be moot, right? And I feel like that seems like a likelihood it could even happen this year. I don't think anyone would be shocked if the Chiefs did it because they've figured out that defense and that offense is getting rolling, right? So that's part of it. I think also I took a look at the individual cap hits of the individual years of these quarterbacks because it is hard retroactively to figure out what their average cap hit is because of the like when deals are reworked, it wipes out the future cap of the previous deal. And so you can't get a very good understanding of what the true average is, which also means that the average isn't very helpful because it doesn't usually apply, even though it might impact the way you set up future deals. So I looked at this two ways. One, I looked at just in terms of the actual percentage of the cap that quarterback took up on the winning Super Bowl team. And then two, that plus the available cap space they had by the end of the year, which I think is really important because the underlying question is, does that quarterback's contract prevent us from signing players that'll help us win? Like, does it prevent us from going after that offensive lineman we need? Does it prevent us from, keeping this defense together? That's really important. And if you're left with like $20 million in cap space, it clearly did not, like the fact that the quarterback only took up $12 million instead of $15 million or whatever doesn't matter. So I looked at it two ways. And then I also looked at the Super Bowl losers because I don't think it's like that relevant, right? That, say that Patrick Mahomes lost this last year, right? Or that Tom Brady lost against the Eagles. There's clearly a Super Bowl winning roster, right? I don't think, for example, like one of the examples here is Matt Ryan that year in 2016 took up, I want to say 15% of the cap, like precisely what this question is asking. And I don't think the reason they lost that Super Bowl is because they had to pay for somebody else. And then they couldn't, right? They also happen to have another $10 million in cap space that year. So it doesn't really matter. But I looked at that, and there are of the Super Bowl winners, the maximum is about 12.5. I guess Tampa Bay was 12.6% in this last Super Bowl of the winners. That's three of them. That includes, and I looked at 6 because I thought it was kind of a weird cutoff to excise out the time Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl as a free agent quarterback. Like I feel like that's relevant to this example. But so Peyton Manning took up 12.2% of the cap, and then after that, it's Tom Brady at 8.9. I did Carson Wentz for Philadelphia and not Nick Foles, even though I think Foles may have taken up more of the cap at the time because, he won most of the games to get them there, which is an awful thing for me to have to admit. But it would have been funny if it was like Nick Foles and it was smaller and it was like, 1% of the cap. That's how you do it. But yeah, New England again, 12.4%. Tom Brady again in 2020, 12.6%. Of the losers, only Matt Ryan took up more. So actually, like on average, the cap hit has been higher for the Super Bowl winning teams than the Super Bowl losing teams. But if you take a look at like effective cap consumed, if you add in the additional cap space that they had by the end of the year, there are 4 Super Bowl winners of the last 6 that consumed 15% or more. And then 2 Super Bowl losers of the last 6 that consume 15% or more. So I don't think that this is actually as big a constraint as it seems. You do have to make sure that, A, if you are consuming 15% of the cap, you're an MVP quality quarterback. Kirk Cousins is not. So the issue is not that he consumes 15% of the cap. The issue is rather that he is not good enough to consume 15% of the cap, because you can have a quarterback that's good enough to consume 15% of the cap and field a Super Bowl winning roster. There is a piece that I wrote. It is so long. Like I was assigned this piece, I think last week, and I didn't get around to even beginning to write it until Monday. I don't think my editor listens to the podcast, but if so, sorry. And
for a number of things, really.
Yeah, for so many things. Holy crap. But in writing this piece, it ended up, I thought it was going to be, 2,000 words, which is like a somewhat lengthy piece, not by like a reef standards, but like generally for most people. And it wasn't. It ended up being 6,000 words by the time I was done with it, and it was really just the question of like what holds Kirk Cousins back. It's a very, like I said, a very lengthy piece. I talked about it at the end of the interview with Justice, and we talked about it. And it's probably not going to be published until next week because it needs a little bit more time to edit and a little bit more room to breathe. And by the time I submitted it to my editor, I'd cut it down to 5,000 words. But still, it's quite long, and it's one of the pieces I'm actually happier with. So hopefully you can take a look at that. But that it delves into the question of why Kirk Cousins might not be good enough to consume 15.5% of the cap. So if he wants to win a Super Bowl, it's not that he needs to take a pay cut, but rather he can't continue consuming that percentage of the cap, because he can get paid the same and consume less and less of the cap as time goes on because the cap will increase. But he has to be comfortable with the fact that his contract is not going to be the kind of contract that will allow the type of quarterback he is to win a Super Bowl, because one of the elements of who Kirk Cousins is that he needs a good supporting cast. And I go into that into the piece as well as to why that might be the case. Because we talk about this all the time. Like, hey, he needs a good supporting cast to win. I attempt to figure out why that's the case for him more than it is for other quarterbacks. So because that's who he is, he cannot be part of a winning franchise unless they're part of a phenomenal draft class, say like the 2015 Vikings or the 2017 Saints or the 2020 Bucks or whatever, right? You have to be part of a phenomenal draft class that is cost controlled, or you just cannot consume that much cap space. So that's the issue. So yeah, he should take a pay cut if he wants to win a Super Bowl. But that's only if that's his only goal. If he wants to maximize his value, don't take a pay cut. Get as much money as you can. I don't really care. I think it's cool when players get paid, even if I think like Kirk Cousins, for example, is like a huge dork that I would not want to hang out with. Like, get your money, dude. I don't care.
Kenneth Allen asks, would you consider the Vikings to be a cold weather team? They prefer to think of themselves as run first, although in a zone scheme rather than power, and Kirk loves to throw short. Will that translate well to what might be one of the coldest games in Lambeau history?
Yeah, so the weather impact that's been studied tells us that what might matter more than temperature or rain or snow is wind, which we saw obviously in the Buffalo Patriots game. That was kind of wild, the first Buffalo Patriots game. I say wild just in terms of its strategy. I think watching it did not feel like it was wild. Like the winds were like notable, right? But it didn't feel like it was crazy. But like the fact of how that game unfolded was kind of crazy. So that matters more than anything else. But I think once you get to extreme temperatures like this, or like the 2015 TCF, or I guess it was technically 2016, but the 2015 playoffs at TCF Bank Stadium, those extreme weather conditions, obviously it matters. It's just kind of how much does it differentially impact different types of play styles. And I think once you get to that cold, it's harder to catch a football. I don't think it matters as much throwing the ball as it does catching it. Here I'm speaking to my experience as a Minnesotan. So James, you've got as much relevant experience as I do here. But I feel like the bigger issue is not whether or not you can throw a ball. I think it's got to be catching it and knowing. I think the sense is called proprioception, knowing where your body parts are in relation to yourself, right? Because when it gets that cold and you can't feel your fingers, you don't know necessarily where you are because you rely on all these microsenses to tell you all these things. So I think that's the bigger issue. So running the ball would make sense in super cold weather. Throwing short might help, but I think actually throwing deep and throwing short in this situation are not too different, because deep ball tracking is a specific skill that does not require as much in terms of body awareness as you might think. So I don't know, James, what do you think?
I think that the idea that the team that plays indoors being an actual outdoors team without statistics behind it is kind of a misnomer.
I think the Vikings think of themselves as a cold weather team, and they are built like you might expect a cold weather team. But whether or not that means they themselves, who have an indoor facility and play indoors, although they did practice in like 7-degree weather today, whether they themselves are a cold weather team, that's totally different. But certainly,
I feel like they're skating by on their legend a bit more than what is happening in reality. They're skating by more on, like, they're living out. Oh yeah, we had Metropolitan Stadium and all this. Have you seen the video of them walking around with flamethrowers trying to like de-ice stuff? Like,
God, that rules so much.
That's a great video. It's a fantastic video. But they're skating by on their history more than anything else. And unless you bring up like actual cold hard stats, I'm not meaning for that to be a pun, but like unless you're bringing up like real stats on that, I've got to call BS on the idea that Minnesota is an outdoor team. Can they play outside? Yes. Are they built like a team that would be good outside? Yes. But then you would have to remember what I've been preaching for months: the Vikings are not to be trusted.
Well, but as to the question of like throwing versus catching, like just in your experience in cold weather, what's the difficulty there? Is it because I think it's with the catching and not with throwing. I think you can throw just fine.
I think you can throw just fine, but it's the like actually trying to accomplish your goal. Like that's the crap. Like oh, I see something coming. I can get. No, you can't. You don't know. You don't know. Your body is trying to tell you it's someplace it's not supposed to be. Why the hell would it try to help you and like catch the ball? Or like if somebody tossed some keys to you in a parking lot somewhere, your body is screaming, "Get in the car!" Like your body is screaming, "You should have done this inside." Like there's nothing about this your body wants anything to do with. So like throwing the ball, fine, but no, catching it ends up being the real issue here.
Yeah, one additional thing, hits hurt a lot worse in the cold. They hurt so much in the cold.
Oh yeah, you can fall on the ice, like, or you can like trip during the summer, and like it sucks, but like you can still get up. You fall in the winter, and there's a whole like, oh god, that might be the worst. I might have actually done something to my knee. Like, you really have to like second guess every movement when you're out in cold that bad, especially while you were out there to begin with. But that's, maybe that's just me. Kenneth Allen also has a question for Arif and would like some clarification, I feel is what he's asking for here. For Arif's Case Cookus Correction Corner, are you ready to give a public apology for forgetting Leibniz's name in a previous episode, or will your case remain cooked? For those who listened to last episode, Arif... It was calculus, correct? That was the...
it was calculus.
There was a discussion about who invented calculus. And Arif was right in that one of the guys had an L name, but then just left it at that. And Kenneth Allen on Twitter went off...
Livid.
On an all-time rant. And then, as the icing on the cake, proceeded to explain that James Madison University has a Leibniz School of Math on campus. The program's named after the guy. And that's when he came off the top rope.
Well,
and
technically it's in Germany, but it is a James Madison.
Yep.
So it's the Leibniz Institute for Applied Geophysics. That's I wasn't going to apologize until this was specifically brought up. Yep. That's wild. He was going, like, Kenneth Allen was just going off. Like, he was talking about how Leibniz has a cookie named after him, but Newton doesn't, which clearly he was saying that specifically to get a response, right? Because you only say that if you know what your response is going to be to the Fig Newton, which he had a screenshot, I assume, ready to go. Yeah. The Fig Newton is actually not named for Isaac Newton. I actually didn't read the second part of the screenshot. I assume it's named for like the person who founded Fig Newton.
The town. It was named for the town, yeah.
Yeah. So, he was ready to fight on this issue. Which, like, okay.
He came ready fun. For war and then started throwing bombs.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say that my understanding that Isaac Newton was not alone in inventing calculus, I think is good, more information for the podcast to propagate than not. And the fact that I forgot Leibniz's name is just a small... How many football podcasts talk about LaSalle's theory of evolution, and the guy who invented calculus whose name starts with L. Not that many. I think I actually did, relatively speaking, a pretty good job there. So I think, given the expectations of me doing this off the top of my head, I live with a biologist, so that's why I know LaSalle's name. I don't live with a physicist or a mathematician, so that's why I didn't know Leibniz's name. But I will say, Kenneth Allen, you did a very good series of tweets. Your tweet that Leibniz was it twice the scientist of Isaac Newton, or something like that. Obviously, on face, sounds insane, but you did provide some Wikipedia screenshots to back up your claim, and obviously, on Norse Code, we'll accept that as scientific evidence. So, no apology, although you were right.
That was pretty amazing. Coldhammer asks, in the spirit of justice being a quote-unquote owner of the Packers, what's the stupidest thing James and Arif have ever bought?
So James has a great answer. I'll start with my answer. So I've got two answers. First one is Bitcoin. That worked out for me, right? Like, I made a bunch of money on Bitcoin. That doesn't make it not stupid. I was just lucky, right? And the only reason I bought Bitcoin was because I needed access to NFL streams way back in the way back, and it was illegal, right? So they didn't want to accept like legal currency, so they accepted Bitcoin. And at the time, whatever Bitcoin wallet I was using, I think it was, actually, I don't want to give them free advertising. Whatever Bitcoin wallet I was using wouldn't let me buy in, I think the unit that people now are using are sats or satoshis, which are the super small, like the 0.00001 units of Bitcoin. And so I could only buy in larger increments, which, at the time Bitcoin was like $200, right? So it wasn't that big of a deal. And so I bought like a couple Bitcoin to get access to a $50 access to the service, right? And I was just out of college. I had just quit my job in politics. I was starting this like football thing. I didn't have any money, right?
You were young and needed the money.
Yeah, and so, but I needed to, like, if I'm going to do this football thing, I do need to watch football, and this thing costs less than like direct ticket and cable and whatever DirecTV only had. Like, I think Red Zone was only on DirecTV at the time, just like Sunday Ticket. I don't know. Anyway, that was the stupidest thing I ever bought. It obviously worked out for me. The second stupidest thing, tickets to a Vikings game for somebody who was cheating on me at the time, who it turned out was texting the person she was cheating on me with while at the game. So that sucks. That was stupid. I found that out on the way back from the game. So that was cool. That ruled, and I am happy about it.
Clearly, there's it's comforting, especially with me and my problems. It's comforting to hear that you have no bitterness.
I would never be bitter about that, especially. Well, I will say this: we were both awful in the relationship. This is not a no fault. Like, when we calculated the relative degree of fault, I believe that's a clip show episode.
Yes.
In your relationships, this one would have been we're both 100% at fault here. This is just bad. We're bad for each other. We should not be together. So yeah. I will say that. But yeah, now you have a story, James, of literally anybody else being as bad at relationships.
Well, just because I've never had success, personally, it doesn't mean that other people can't do it. I can't be an astronaut either, but there are people out there that are successful at doing it. If I'm going to think about the dumbest thing I ever bought, I'm going to think about, two things. I'm going to think about this car that I just got a bit of money. I had sold the rights to this album I had recorded that was going to go to a label. And the band didn't have any money, so I ended up getting the money on the masters. And so when it came to actually, like, they found a label that would distribute it, great. I signed, I had a good contract. They paid me a little bit of money. I say money, we're talking like $1,500. This isn't a lot of money, but I needed a car. So I went and I said to I think I said to one of my grandparents, I said, listen, I need a car. You hang out at car auctions all auctions all the time. Can you find me a car that works? I need to be able to drive. The thing I have is going to die. And I get a call about a week later. Hey, bought you a car. Should be happy. I'm like, great. Well, the problem is that when they bought the car at auction, they didn't see it move backwards. Nobody checked the transmission.
Oh boy.
The transmission was completely shot to the point where he saw it out front, whatever, it was fine. And like when they pushed it forward, or like when they moved it out to where it needed to be, it could go into drive. It could go into park or it could go into drive, but it couldn't reverse. And he didn't know that until he tried to pull the car out of the parking and drive it home.
Deed in hand, I assume. Goodness. Yes. Wow.
So then he had to drop like $900, $1,000 on the transmission for it. And the car was just like the worst of like the lemoniest of the lemons. Like women in like mesh tops would have been like stealing it in situations that you wouldn't want them to steal. It was just terrible. Just the absolute worst lemon stealing people would be trying to take this car. It was terrible. And I don't even remember paying him back for the car by the end of it, honestly. Like I think I owed him for the transmission, and I just went, I owe you for the transmission ?
Oh.
I don't remember saying that I wanted a car without a working transmission. I wanted a car that could go. I wanted a car that could go backwards and forwards. Like a
common requirement for motor vehicles these days.
I don't remember this being something that was negotiable, but we'll see. I may have paid him back at some point on that. I'd have to check. I think that money might have just been forgotten about. But, I could also throw a wedding ring on there, and that would be perfectly fine, too. Nolan asks, for North Code, given the Vikings' proven excellence of claiming top-notch talent from off of practice squads this week, why have we not seen them sign Blue Bomber ace Liram? I'm not going to pronounce that last name. You can't pay me to pronounce that last name. How will the Panthers now ruin our playoff dreams with him nailing every kick until season's end?
But James successfully navigating away from Kosovo Twitter getting mad at him.
Yeah.
It's the first name, actually, that gives, because there's multiple ways that vowel can go, but I've seen versions of this last name, so I'm kind of okay with it. So I think it's Liram Hadrulahu. Also, I feel like he did like a preseason circuit in the NFL at some point. I think I've seen his name before. Anyway, he has nearly 700 CFL punts and nearly 300 field goal kicks. And I was looking at his CFL stats and I was like, Jesus Christ, that's a lot of punts. His teams must suck. And then I realized, wait, there's only 3 downs in Canadian football. Of course, there's a ton of punts. I, a clear CFL fan, knew this instinctively, but merely forgot about it very briefly when looking at his punt totals. Anyway, he can both punt and kick, which obviously means the Vikings are interested. Even though they didn't sign him, the Panthers did. The Panthers clearly cannot ruin their playoff dreams this year, as the Panthers would have to do something about the playoffs. But next year, yeah, that's absolutely going to happen for sure.
Let's go to Chris, who asks, we all know about Tom Brady's pliability and Russell Wilson's bubble water. How come no one is asking Kirk what his secret is to staying on the field? Or is it simply a matter of not wanting the answer when his apparently successful solution to COVID was, in fact, a plexiglass box?
I would love to know what the answer to that is. I don't know. Sometimes like Iron Men are Iron Men, right? Like I don't know that Peyton Manning had like a secret to constantly being on the field until his neck injury, right? Can you imagine asking Brett Favre what his secret is? There's no way Brett Favre has a secret. He's just there, right? I think so Cousins does take like a ton of care of his body. He's got his own like nutritionist. He's got his own like brain coach. He's got his own like specific personal trainer. Like he spends a lot of time taking care of his body. He's got a very specific diet. In fact, there was even like a moment when the Vikings were courting Cousins, they took Cousins to Manny's like they take every free agent to. And there's like a moment where people are like, well, can Cousins eat that? Like, is that allowed in terms of his specific diet? It's apparently inspired by or close to or something resembling the Tom Brady diet, although it's not the same thing. But I do think that is something that he has kind of expounded upon in the past. I could look forward and put it in the show notes, but in terms of like what his answer is, I would love to know what his answer is. So, but I do think that he would say something along the lines of, how much he, invests in expertise in taking care of his brain, his emotional state, his physical state, and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of investment into, like, he was doing a bunch of sleep science stuff before a lot of NFL teams were. I don't know actually. So one thing to be clear, a lot of people that are selling solutions and a lot of athletes that are buying these solutions, a lot of it is like mumbo jumbo pseudoscientific garbage. And I don't know if what he's doing is scientifically sound. Like, I would love for a brain expert to tell me if beta waves and theta waves can be detected with like electrodes on your head, or if they're real, or if monitoring them can help improve your performance or whatever, because that's what he's doing. I would not be shocked if the answer was no. I'd only be a little bit surprised if the answer was yes, that they're real and that you can track them and that they help. But I'm saying that his answer would involve kind of that cadre of experts that he has like built around him over the years.
All right, next question is going to be from Luke Braun, who asks, if a podcast bullies somebody, but they don't get time to listen to it, is it actual cruelty?
Yeah, like 1,000 other people listen to it. You get bullied, Luke. That's what happened.
Yeah, and people keep telling you about it, so I feel like that.
And then they paid us. That's Luke. You got to understand this. They listened to us bully you, and then they paid us.
Yeah, they're voting with their wallet. Let's go to the next question, which is Fear the Beard, who asks, which NFC North team has the brightest future, and why is it the Detroit Lions?
I am still a believer in Justin Fields. You can go back to our interview with Lauren Cox about kind of what I like about Justin Fields and why his struggles this year, while real and why he is a bad quarterback currently, don't necessarily mean that he's going to struggle going forward in the future, right? So I'll say that. And I do think that the Bears are kind of on that list. But I will say I love Dan Campbell. Like, who doesn't love Dan Campbell? He rules. Like, he's... I mean, obviously he's like gregarious and he says a lot of stuff that's like kind of funny, like the bite the kneecap stuff was fun. And I think a lot of people that are into Detroit sports maybe took the ribbing the wrong way because we thought he was just like this giant idiot, which I don't know, maybe he came off that way, but I don't know. He's like very authentic. Like, there's a lot of coaches out there that are authentic. Like, I think, Mike Zimmer's actually, he's one of them, right? Like he's super authentic with, his emotions. He wears them on his sleeve. It's not very difficult to see what he's feeling, even if it feels like it would be in his team's best interest for him to, not have to like reveal his plans every week or whatever. Right. But he's very authentic. Right. Dan Campbell is definitely kind of up there in terms of guys that exactly what he's feeling. He clearly cares and he's emotionally invested in the human side of football. And I love that. And I love that, like, this team that was like winless until the Vikings came around, continued attempting to win games. They were in so many close games, just like the Vikings, and they pulled it out. I don't know. That rules. I just don't know if they're gonna have an answer at quarterback anytime soon. There's obviously talent problems throughout the roster. Liking the coach doesn't mean that coach is good. But I mean, I like the case for being interested in Detroit. I just don't really like the case for Detroit having like a bright future until you can figure out that quarterback thing, because this is not a good quarterback draft. Detroit currently is not a great destination for free agent quarterbacks. I can't imagine any traded quarterback would agree to go there if they had, a lot of control over where they were going. So it's not Detroit until it becomes that. But man, I like Dan Campbell a lot.
Yeah, it is very hard not to like him, and the energy that he's bringing to that team, it's infectious. It's fun. Like, I find myself cheering for the Lions more than I likely have in the past however many number of years. But
yeah, like Jim Schwartz didn't do that.
No, absolutely not.
Caldwell won and he didn't do that, right? Like, I don't know. The Lions are fun.
They are fun. And the other problem with the Lions ends up being a combination of ownership and GM as well. And boy howdy, do the Detroit Lions faithful not like the ownership.
No, they do not.
So that ends up being part of the whole Lions experience. So I like the Lions. I think they're really fun to watch. I think that they've been able to accomplish a surprising amount this year, considering you lose a game to the Ravens on the longest field goal kick in NFL history. You're gonna have an interesting season.
Yeah,
like it's they're fun to watch, and it's fun to cheer for them. So, and because they've been so terrible for so long, you don't feel like you're cheating on your team or anything. Just throwing that out there. Zach asks, what are the odds we upset the Packers and move into a win and in situation next week, only for Kirk to get COVID, resulting in a loss to the Bears and missing the playoffs? I have been saying this to friends for weeks, that this was the most likely scenario for the season to end. That Kirk just forgets his plexiglass one day. And it's
just forgets the plexiglass.
And it's the Tuesday practice after beating the Packers.
I mean, it feels inevitable. Like, in the way that we all knew that Sean Mannion was going to contract COVID-19 as soon as Mike Zimmer said, "I'm not worried about him contracting COVID-19." It feels inevitable that that the writers of the season wouldn't dangle this thing about Kirk Cousins' vaccination status over us all year just to let it go at the end. There's no way. The seasons don't work like that. I've watched enough Netflix.
No, this turns into the Chekhov's gun situation. You introduced the gun in the preseason. Now you have to fire it. That is how all this works.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. This is Thanos style inevitable. Like you can't do a thing about it. Ryan asks for the Jared Allen appreciation corner. Would Hall of Fame finalist Jared Allen, 5 years post-retirement, start over our current defensive ends? Also, should Rick make the call with his job on the line?
I don't know that Jared Allen would start over Sheldon Richardson, but I don't know that he wouldn't start over DJ Wanham, right? If they just drove to Arizona, picked him up and drove back, right? Not even flew. If he got beat up in an awful road trip car ride, right? And they were like, "Hey, we have an extra spot on the roster," because of course we do. We're always have an extra spot on the roster. It's 2021. Here's your jersey. It's got your name on the back. You're starting tomorrow. Not only would I imagine he'd be totally down, right? He'd just be like, "Yeah, this is weird. Let's do it." I could see him playing ahead of DJ Wanham for sure. The problem is that the biggest issue Allen thought he had late in his career was his ability to maintain a football playing weight. He would always shed weight way too quickly during the season late in his career, and I can't imagine he felt all that hyped up about doing it. So if you picked him up off the street today with no workout, no training, whatever, he would be bad. But I don't know that he would necessarily be worse than DJ Wanham.
For Michael Johnson, he asks, we all know that the Lagrange points are the 6 theoretical points of stability in a two-body system. However, with the James Webb Telescope being deployed to the L2 point in the Earth-Sun system, can Arif explain how the orbit of the moon might affect the stability of this point long-term? And given its 10-year anticipated lifespan, will the telescope be able to find an offensive line for the Vikings within that time frame? I told Arif pre-show, this is what you get for making the moon and hexing the moon your thing. You take the good and you take the bad, and this is a beautiful combination of both.
All right, so one, we need occasional, presumably he listens to the show because he does write into the show every so often. We need Bill Botkey's opinion on this. He's space studies, I think is how he signs off his emails. He's a professional space scientist guy, which I assume interacts with astrophysics at some point. That's just going to be my guess. So I'm going to need his comment. But also, my brother, so I'm still in Vermont. There's actually I can't make it back in time for the Packers game. We had to delay for a number of reasons, which is really unfortunate. But when we first showed up here in Vermont, my brother would not stop talking about the James Webb Telescope. He loves this. He is this doesn't shock you, James, because he's a huge nerd. But he is super into it. And then he and Chelsea started talking about Lagrange points and the L2 point. So I watched some YouTube videos so I could get up to speed, because now I'm a scientist, because I've watched 2 YouTube videos on the James Webb Telescope. So I'm totally up to date. So the L2 point, I guess, is 4 times the distance away from Earth as the moon is. So the moon, once it is at that stable point away from the Earth in the L2 point, should not be impacted too much by the moon. But we do know that the moon is fickle and rude. We've talked about this before on the show. Longtime listeners know, since at least episode 3.
God, I love that trope.
We've long talked about the moon in the show. The moon impacts the trajectory that the James Webb Telescope can take to get to the Lagrange point, so they have to be very careful figuring out when they were going to launch, what trajectory they were going to launch at, what path they were going to launch with, how much fuel to add, and that kind of stuff, what corrections they need to make. So the moon will affect the stability of their ability to get there short term, but long term, my understanding is that the moon's gravitational impact on the James Webb Telescope is actually fairly minimal. It might create some observational wobble and stuff like that you need to correct for, but because the moon is in a predictable, stable orbit, that is something that you can continue to correct for as time goes on. So given that, the telescope, which has the ability to see many, 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 many times further than the Hubble Space Telescope, should finally be able to find some offensive linemen that can play well for the Vikings.
Well, that's the hope and prayer, I suppose. Ted Glover asks, please rank the following civil wars. American, Captain America, Webb versus Ponder, and the upcoming Slaughter versus Mond.
So there needs to be some system by which you rank the civil wars. And I don't mean like a spreadsheet, like we need some sort of calculate. We need to literally know what it is we're ranking. Worst? Best? What does best mean? Best by what category? Most interesting to talk about? Let's do that one. Most interesting to talk about civil wars ranked. 1, American, by far. Are you kidding me? Have you seen the Ken Burns documentary? 2, Webb versus Ponder, because it ended up being very funny that Webb ended up starting a playoff game for the Vikings against the Packers. And Joe Webb rules. 3, Captain America Civil War. Good movie, but whatever. It's not that I'm burnt out in the Marvel stuff, although I am. It's more that Captain America Civil War is one of the less interesting Marvel movies, and is mostly interesting just because they were able to create an ensemble cast for that movie. But a lot of the individual movies, including Winter Soldier, the other Captain America movies, are much more interesting than Civil War. So there's that. And then I think Slaughter versus Mond, whatever. Slaughter's going to be off the roster next week. Mond is going to stay on the roster for a while. Kyle Slaughter, the fact that he's on a Vikings roster is super funny. The fact that he's bounced around NFL rosters for a while, very funny. After he was cut from the Vikings initially, Slaughter kind of made the rounds in the Vikings podcast universe, the Vikings podcast universe that actually interviews other athletes. We don't really do that. And it seemed very vocal and bitter about his eventually being cut, because he pointed out that he was really great in the preseason, he's very successful, and that even though he outperformed his competition, he didn't make the roster. And I don't know, I don't know why he thinks that the Vikings have it out for him, or what bias exists against him in the organization that would also continuously sign him to the roster but just not give him a chance. What set of biases would have to exist? That Civil War is not going to be very large. Mond is going to win pretty outright, even though Slaughter is ahead of him on the depth chart, which is hilarious. But also, the more we talk about it, the less we can make fun of the fact that Jordan Love was behind Tim Boyle on the depth chart last year for the Packers. So cool your Rockets.
It is just fun, the fact that he's on the team again. I enjoy that.
Best preseason quarterback to have ever slung the rock, yeah.
Yeah, somehow better than Heineke. It's crazy. Let's go to Ian Pauly, who asks, for both of your getting a hot food from Thai places as a white as copy paper person, corner, we are once again ordering from a Thai place that has a very limited menu for people who don't have a taste for seafood, which is a damn curse when you live in an already cursed state of Florida. Boy, Fair. That's a sentence. Yeah. My wife, who is half Mexican, doesn't believe me that this is a real problem, and I remember that from many episodes ago, Arif's friend experiencing a phenomenon, I believe, at an Indian restaurant. She told me asking for it to be, quote, brown person spicy is probably a touch too racist. Honestly, fair. But I don't want to end up with basil fried rice at a spice level of rye bread. Short of having her father go in person to order for me, what do I do in the future?
Okay, so this is interesting. James has an answer, which he says is a great answer, so he should go second. I am surprised that your wife hasn't seen this phenomena play out in other contexts. Like,
this is like the opposite of white privilege.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, actually. As much as I would almost never enjoy hearing that specific phrase, James, yes, I think you're right.
No, that is exactly what this is. Like, I've never heard of anyone having this problem. Yeah, that's because this isn't something that happens to you.
Well, okay, so, but he says she's half Mexican, right? Like, so presumably she grew up in a mixed household, maybe. Like, I don't know what the background is, right? Maybe not, but that would come up in a mixed house. It comes up with Chelsea and I all the time. I shouldn't say, it's not like we discuss this every day. It comes up once a month, maybe. But that's all the time when you're in a relationship. I'm kind of surprised. This obviously it happened to my friend at Indian restaurants and other places. Another example to add on to this list of examples. When I was with the debate team, we were eating in Lexington, Kentucky, and there's this Indian restaurant in a strip mall in Lexington, or there was at least. I don't know. This was a decade ago, right? That our head coach would always take us to. Because he thought it was one of the best Indian restaurants that was within walking distance of a college campus that we would end up debating at, right? Which is there's a lot of Indian restaurants, but it's a very specific type of constraint. So we would always go to this one because it wasn't as much better than a lot of these other ones. If anyone in Lexington, Kentucky knows which Indian restaurant I'm talking about, please let me know because it was actually quite good. But one of the reasons that he liked going was that after his first couple of years there, because, he's been a debate coach forever. He, coached at McAllister College, he coached at Wyoming, he coached at a bunch of other places. I think at the University of Miami too. And so over time he would continue going back and they would realize that he could handle, higher and higher levels of spice. But 1 year we went without him because he was coaching kids at another simultaneous tournament. And so the servers would always look at me when one of the white people were ordering and specified their spice level. And I would every single, this happened like 14 people, right? And for 10 of them, they would look at me and I would have to give this weird nod of approval. 2 of those people have way better spice tolerance than me.
Talk about gatekeeping. Just
yeah, no, I mean, kind of. 2 of those people have way better spice tolerance than me. It is I would ask them about the spice, and one of them is now my friend that I was talking about has a better spice tolerance than me. At the time, we were probably somewhat similar, but 2 of those people had insane. They would grow Scotch bonnets and stuff like that, and they would eat them just raw. They were just nuts. I would ask them about it all the time. Hey, do you taste the peppers or just the spice? And they're no, we taste the peppers. We like the fruitiness of this pepper. I'm okay, this is wild. I'm done. So this happens. This happens a lot. So so I'm validating your experience. 1, 2. I don't know that you can avoid having her father go in person to order, except you should conduct an experiment, right? You should go in and order and give the exact order. I want it at this level of spice. If they ask you what spice level you want it at, this is what I want. Because some restaurants, there's a lot of restaurants that don't do it at all, right? There's, especially I think at a time when a lot of stuff is done via pickup, so you don't know who's receiving it. You just do it. You just cook it the normal way. But yeah, I think absolutely you should go in, order basil fried rice, and then 30 minutes later, whatever. It doesn't have to be that much later. Her her father goes in, orders basil fried rice, and then you just compare notes. Like, oh no, now you have twice as much basil fried rice as before. Huge problem. How are you going to solve it? Like that, it seems like a fine cost to this experiment. And if there's no change, then it's one of those restaurants that just cook it the same way no matter what. If there is a change, there you go.
So I run into this situation a lot more often than I would like. And there is a restaurant, oddly enough, there's a restaurant in Grand Forks that serves Indian food. And admittedly, it is better than it has any right to be. For Indian food in the middle of North Dakota, it's actually pretty good. And, what I've done with them is I have, when I come in, I kind of, remember that scene? I don't know if you've seen the movie Half-Baked, but if you haven't seen the movie Half-Baked, there's a scene in which Dave Chappelle has to do something outrageous in order for the bodega owner to like remember him. So he knows that it's cool that he buys illicit materials from him. So I kind of had to go in and make a bit of a show about me and my level of spice. So what I did was I found out what country that the servers tend to be from, and I learned a phrase in their language.
This is so much work.
It wasn't that bad. It was just Urdu, which Urdu is a difficult language.
Merely Urdu.
It was Urdu. From what people say, and again, we're in the white privilege corner. From what people say, like English is like one of the hardest languages for people to learn. I just learned one phrase in Urdu, and it was just tell the chef I insulted his mother.
Oh, that's good.
And that did it. That solved all of the heat problems for any of the food I have ordered. Nobody has asked me anything. The heat level is consistently higher if I do it in person, because they remember that I'm the guy who told them that I insulted the chef's mother. Like, take a couple minutes. You probably don't even need to go outside of Google Translate for this. Just find out the nationality and the location of where they're from, and pile off a couple of insults, maybe. Just really, really work this as best as you can. Or have a gatekeeper come with you in order to get the basil fried rice that you so deserve in this life. Sometimes you just have to insult the chef's mother. I'm sorry. That's just
James did have a good answer, it turns out.
Yes, it turns out. It is stupid how often, because I've literally been in I've told the story on the show before, but I've literally been in that exact situation that you described for the Indian restaurant at an Indian restaurant in Roseville. That's awesome. I think it's the India Palace in Roseville next to 35. Great place. Love it. I still try to find myself there whenever I'm in the cities. But one of the first times I went there, I said that I wanted it as spicy as the Mexican that was sitting next to me. My buddy Angel, he was ordering. He told me I needed to go and taste this, and I said that I wanted it as spicy as him. The waiter came back and asked, "Are you sure he wants it brown people spicy?" Like, he like whispered it in his ear.
I need to be clear that this is a method for these restaurants to protect themselves from angry white people. Like, I just want to be clear that there's a reason that they do this. It's not necessarily, it might be, but it's not necessarily that they're being racist against white people. It is a business decision to protect themselves from people who might have very unfamiliar palates and different understandings of what spiciness is. I just want to put that out there. I'm sorry this happened to you, James.
Like, I'm not even embarrassed, or I'm not even like whatever. Like, the fact that I appreciate they were checking up on me, but like,
did they poke their head? Because I've seen that happen once, not at the Lexington restaurant, but I've seen that where they like look to see if like the person that has clarified that they specifically want this kind of spicy is doing all right. Have they did that ever happen to you?
Yes, that has absolutely happened. Because when he wasn't there, I said to the staff, "Tell the chef I insulted his mother. I want to feel this tomorrow. Like, I want this to be spicy." The thing about it that I love is my buddy, who is of Mexican descent, can speak Urdu. He can speak a number of different languages. I have no idea why he is doing the things that he is doing now and can speak all of these languages. It makes whatever. But the point is, he could speak Urdu, and he was speaking to them in their native tongue, and they were enjoying the hell out of it. And then when they came back and they whispered to him in Urdu, does he really want it brown people spicy? Like, does he really want it us spicy? Like, the fact that it was even done in their native language might make it better. But that's, that's a whole nother thing. Don from Ohio is going to close us out this week with a couple of questions. Whose brand has had a better week? Arif's due to an unvaccinated Carson Wentz, most likely costing his team a division title and a playoff spot. Or me, since our Lord and Savior Kyle Sloter has risen again and is here to save our favorite football team.
Well, the worst brand has to be Kellen Mond for not being able to play as the backup quarterback. But I cannot take this as a brand win. One, because it means that a person has contracted the disease, and I cannot celebrate that. But two, also, if Carson Wentz is fine, at which point it becomes, acceptable to celebrate this fact. The new NFL regulations, which are tailing the CDC regulations, would allow him to potentially, depending on when the test was positive, whether it's like Monday or Tuesday, would allow him to potentially play in every single game this weekend, or every single game for the rest of the season anyway. If it was the 10-day limitation, that would prevent him from playing one of those games, again, because it tested early in the week rather than later in the week, and so it's not 2 games. So he might still play. So it's a very kind of mitigated win for me in the world where it is acceptable to celebrate this sort of thing. So it is kind of by default Don from Ohio's brand winning out this week. Also, I took a couple of days off this week. You heard the interview with Justice. I have no idea what's happening in football right now. So like any brand related things that have happened, I've missed out on a lot of. So Don from Ohio has a lot of default wins here. The fact that it's Kyle Sloter specifically, yeah, that helps a lot. So I got to say, unfortunately, I do have to give this one to Don from Ohio and the Slaughterhouse 5 gang. You got one today in one of the most improbable signings that I can remember.
Don from Ohio also asks, when Kyle Sloter leads us to victory over the Packers this weekend at Lambeau,
this weekend,
how should Vikings fans celebrate winning 2 Super Bowls in one season?
Yeah, I don't know. First, we have to figure out if there's a unified belt scenario. Again, we talked to Justice about this. We also talked about it last week. I do think that actually it should be a home Super Bowl and away Super Bowl, right? I think that's how you can keep it to 2.
Ooh, I like that one.
Yeah, so it is possible to have 2 belts floating around. You can unify them at some point later in the season or in the off season or whatever, right? Or I should say postseason. I don't know how Vikings fans normally celebrate. Get drunk in the cold and try not to die.
Or in Don's case, just, keep looking at the list of Christmas presents that your wife bought and tell us that it's okay. She knows I looked at the list. It's fine.
That was a weird resolution, right? Where you lied to your wife about whether or not you'd seen it, and she just didn't believe you, and she was right.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I'm not calling him a liar, but I'm not calling him a truther either. Like something's wrong here. Finally, from Don from Ohio, we're gonna touch on the John Madden's passing here. What is your favorite John Madden call of a Randy Moss play? First option, his first touchdown against the Cowboys that Thanksgiving. Second one, his third TD versus the Cowboys, 1998. Or number 3 rather, his last TD versus the Packers in 1998, where Summerall says, "What do you do?" and Madden says, "You jump on the stands."
All right, so I'll say this. Of the first TD, I was not a huge fan of the way Summerall called it. I think the way that he called it is actually somewhat reminiscent of kind of the early Joe Buck stuff that people didn't like before, without the Randy Moss, like, moralizing, just like kind of not being as excited about not having the same level of energy or bringing the same level of energy in the play-by-play call as is appropriate to the play, right? It felt like Summerall's call, that first one, was a little underwhelming. And I've enjoyed most of the Pat Summerall calls that I've heard. So this is surprising when I re-listened to it. I think John Madden did a great job there, but my favorite has to be number 2, the speed kills one, right? Because at some point Summerall began so the third touchdown is the screen pass, right, where he gets the ball at like the 1 or 2 yards off the line of scrimmage, and he forces a missed tackle, and he just runs past every single Cowboy for the touchdown, right? And while I think that kind of highlight is normally just okay as a highlight, when it's someone like Randy Moss, or even if it's someone like Cordero Patterson, the sheer amount of raw speed on display is mind-boggling, especially if you watch it the second or third time around and you take a look at kind of the other defenders trying to account for it. Absolutely mind-boggling. And the announcers are trying to kind of wrap their heads around it. Well, Madden isn't, because at the beginning of the game, Madden says like Randy Moss is already one of the fastest players in the league. Mind you, this is like week 10 or 11, and Randy Moss is a rookie, and Madden has already determined that, like, yeah, Randy Moss is like one of the fastest players in the league. You're just going to have to deal with that. And at some point, Summerall is like, yeah, I guess they just didn't figure out kind of what angles to take. And John Madden is like, when you run that fast, the angle, it doesn't matter, angle from angle. The speed kills. That call rules. I love that one's my favorite one out of all of them. Like, I like that Summerall is asking a question about like, when you're the Packers, I mean, how do you handle Randy Moss? What do you do? And Madden is taking the question very literally, as in, what are you doing right now? Jumping in the stands? Like that's fun. I think Madden on that second play was great, because like one of the things that makes Madden such a great color commentator is that he can explain some really important kind of complex football topics in a really simple manner. But sometimes he can recognize that like the simple thing that we want to talk about, that is actually much more important, right? We can talk about tackling angles and how difficult it is to design a defense, to deal with Randy Moss's talents, how difficult it is to really get a bearing on how you move in on a play like that. And he kind of just waves his hand through the cobwebs, and he's just like, no, Randy Moss is fast. That's the important point that we need to dig in on here. This dude is fast. So yeah, I don't know. It rules.
It's always fun, especially around Thanksgiving, when the clips get posted about or that have Randy Moss scoring all those touchdowns in Dallas. It's so much fun to just listen back, and the one where he burns the defender, and he's just like, yeah, you can't catch up to him. It's just always fun to just like soak that in, because you just get the feeling that John Madden is like, he's watched some Randy Moss tape, but like there's a difference between watching tape and watching it live, just going, wow, he might be the fastest guy in the entire world. Like, what is he doing? This is brilliant. Fantastic.
Yeah. It's so I have a lot of thoughts that I don't really care that much about kind of some of the hot take reactions to John Madden dying. There are 2 viral tweets that went around, one from a professor of critical sports studies or something like that, which is in another life, that's the field of study I'm in, right? In a world where I am an academic, which I'm not.
Arif Hassan, not an academic. Can we get that up? Can we get a business card with that on it?
Yeah, right. You know, and his approach, like, there is something to be said about the discussion that this dude is having that is worth talking about, that did not require leaping off of like the diving board of John Madden's death to do. That is a wild approach to that. And then the other viral tweet apparently was written by somebody my brother kind of knows. And so like my brother was, somebody in the political world had died, and my brother mentioned it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird. John Madden just died. And my brother was like, oh yeah, I'd heard about that. John Madden. Yeah, I saw the one tweet, and I was like, you have to be way more specific than that. I saw a million tweets, because he's a big deal and he died. like I don't know what you mean, Rashad. And he's talking about the tweet from the concussion tweet. Again, I don't want to link to either of these tweets. In fact, I think one of them is deleted. But if you know what tweet I'm talking about, you know what tweet I'm talking about concussions, whatever, right? And again, there is maybe an argument to be said about the impact video games have on our consumption of entertainment that involves a significant amount of risk of the reality that it is representing. Right? It is again very weird to use John Madden's death as the diving board for your swan dive into this discussion. Crazy! I cannot believe you. So instead of spending too much time there, which I already have, I want to say that if you go to Pro Football Reference and find the coaches page, which is actually not super easy to do, and you and you sort the coaches by win percentage, the top coach by win percentage in the modern era is John Madden. So it's 1960 on, or anybody who's coached a significant amount of time since 1960. John Madden has the highest winning percentage. Vince Lombardi, number 2. This dude could coach. Like, he could coach. Like, he is in the Hall of Fame as a coach, right? Like, he is a remarkable coach. And he did so much to make sure that the Sid Gilman style of offense that would later evolve into the Don Coryell offense. And, we've talked about this in the podcast before a number of times, but the school of thought that had created the 1998, I shouldn't say the 1998, but the 90s Cowboys offense with Michael Irvin and the Bang 8, the Norv Turner stuff that, became really popular for a while, that, has informed a lot of our football terminology, like the 9-8-9 play, or the fact that we sometimes call streaks or go routes 9 routes, or that we sometimes call post routes 8 routes, that we most commonly call corner routes 7 routes. That comes from the Don Coryell school of offense. That is an evolution of the Sid Gilman school of offense that John Madden did a ton of work with advancing in the league. He could coach so well. And then he became one of the league's best commentators, one of the league's best educators about the game. And then, of course, he ended up, and there's a really good piece. I think it's even at The Athletic. I don't know for sure, but there's a really good piece that details John Madden's involvement with the game with his name on it, because the initial proposal was that they would pay him for his likeness and then his name would be slapped on the game. And he said, no, we're going to make this game good, and we're going to make it about football. We're not going to make it about, a representation of football like Tecmo Bowl is. We're going to make it football. We're going to install plays, and I'm going to teach you, the game designer, how football works. And so it took like 6 years to get the first game out, because John Madden made sure that you could dial up plays and make sure that when you called plays, that they represented the plays that were on the field, that offensive linemen mattered, that your route running capability mattered, that, whether or not you caught the ball was dependent on how good you were as a receiver. Like, his impact on the game the video game was extraordinary, and not just because his name was on it and that he lent his voice to it, and also created some of the best, like 90s era soundtracks to video games ever, right? Just because you could hear his calls in the game and stuff like that, which ruled, right? But he also was a significant part of the game's design that made it so important for it to replicate football. Like, the only reason ESPN 2K5 and NFL 2K had to advance as much as they did is because Madden did so much. Like, obviously there's a lot to do with why Madden is such a poorly regarded franchise right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the EA monopoly on sports or whatever. We don't have to talk about it too much, but the initial Madden football that came out was only good because of how Madden forced it to be good if his name was going to be on it. And, credit to the game developers for putting up with it, because it was an arduous process. I'll see if I can link a piece about Madden's influence on the actual game itself.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Reef, what do you have to plug?
So there's that Kirk Cousins piece. We pushed it out to next week, in part because, like, Friday pieces, don't get that much, and I work pretty hard on that, so I want people to see it more than just a typical Friday piece. But also in part because there's a lot more work left to be done. Again, I'm super happy with the piece, so that's going to be a pretty long piece. My most recent piece is actually, I've only got one piece because I took a couple of days off. My most recent piece is like 80 comments right now, and it's about how the Vikings loss to the Rams was very similar to their kind of season-long arc. So you can read that over at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Reef-Hassan. Find me on Twitter at AreefHassanNFL.
All right, well, that's going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We will be back next week to talk about the result of the Packers game and wrap up the season. So for Reef, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember that the Vikings are not to be trusted. And we'll be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan of The Athletic, and he can be found at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can do so in a few different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. For $3.50 a month, you get bonus material and more. You can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode for a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and pick up some Norse Code merchandise. Any questions or comments that cannot fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this.
Hey, all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci.